Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MSMEs Startups at 75 Summit, organized by SIDBI in association with Economic Times. Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, AKAM, is the celebration of the coming of the age of the Indian entrepreneurial ecosystem. Owing to a very powerful ecosystem of talent and capital, supported by a robust institutional framework built over 75 years, the Indian MSMEs and startup ecosystem are not only thriving, but are ready to play a bigger role in driving the aspirations of Atmanirbhar Bharat. Today, the MSME sector's contribution not only accounts for 29% of the Indian GDP, but also employs over 11 crore people in its 6.3 crore enterprises. It's time to look back and look forward to understanding how far the sector moved from when it was a few years back, where it stands today, and what lengths it can travel, leveraging the unprecedented institutional financing support. The summit will focus on how MSMEs and startups prepare for this golden period, Amrit Kal of the Indian enterprise ecosystem. It is our pleasure now to invite Mr. S. Raman, Chairman and Managing Director, SIDBI, for delivering the welcome address. A very warm welcome, sir.
Thank you, Smriti. I welcome all of you to a wonderful session today morning brought by SIDBI along with ET. Why are we doing this session? And I think the answer is very clear. We're all looking towards a much more vibrant growth for the MSME sector. Let me just share a statistic with all of you. When we look at the share of the MSMEs on various parameters, the first is growth, the second is employment, and the third is exports. It's interesting to note that the numbers are like 30, 40, and 50%. So we have 30% of GDP brought in by the MSMEs, and 50% of exports are actually accounted for by MSMEs. The exact same statistic, if we were to make a comparison with China, the numbers read, interestingly, at 50, 60, and 70. So you have MSMEs in China accounting for 50% of GDP, 60% of employment, and 70% of exports. So I think we really know the path forward for the Indian MSME ecosystem. The MSMEs have recently been redefined. We have the retail sector brought into MSME. We have a huge startup economy. In fact, there's a lot of, let me say, overlap between startup and MSME. Every startup is virtually an MSME. Some of them grow very large very quickly, but we have seen in the last 18 months an explosion of startups that have done extremely well. The concept of formalization is at the other end of the MSME spectrum. We're talking about nearly 5 crore and plus small, tiny, nano, micro. Those are the words that are being used nowadays to describe those single person entities who are trying to make it big. The digital steps that the country has seen. I think no other country in the world has seen this kind of a digital stack made available by the government to the entire country. Everybody who is either a lender or a borrower or doing any kind of commerce has had the benefit of Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, the whole concept of the payment system. I mean, I don't think we have a payment system as vibrant as we have in UPI anywhere in the world. So it's truly for SIDBI and other such institutions which work along with government, which work along with the private sector, which have numerous partners across the country to tackle the needs of the MSME sector, be it the tiny and the nano, or be it the thriving MSMEs which are looking and bursting the seams looking for growth and markets. This is really the context that I would like to set. And we are overjoyed and extremely happy, and we welcome two individuals who have, I think, seen it all. They've got their hands dirty, and today they have created tremendous empires, robust organizations. We are talking about Mr. Uday Kotak, the head of Kotak Mahindra Bank, and we're talking about Mr. Jayant Sinha, Honorable Member of Parliament. Both of them, their track records read like that of an entrepreneur. So I think we look forward in this inaugural session to both of them giving us their experiences and charting the way forward. In fact, I still recall a snippet from Mr. Kotak's speech probably 5 years ago, where he talked about the banking sector and saying that in about 10 years, the banking sector will be technology and credit. And there'll be nothing but a technology room in which some credit officials would be working around the numbers and delivering credit at speeds that we have not seen. And I think we've already started seeing that happen in the country. So I will stop here. Look forward to a great panel discussion after the inaugural session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Raman, for kickstarting the event and setting the context for the summit. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome one of the doyens of the Indian financial sector, Mr. Uday Kotak, Managing Director and CEO, Kotak Mahindra Bank Limited, for the inaugural address. He is a thought leader and leads several key bodies and is currently the co-chairman of the Indo-UK Financial Partnership, non-executive chairman of a special IL and FS board constituted to steer the NBFC out of a deep crisis, and chairman of the Advisory Committee on Corporate Insolvency and Liquidation, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. He was also the president of the Confederation of the Indian Industry until May 2021. A very warm welcome, sir.
Thank you, Smriti. And I compliment SIDBI and the Economic Times for bringing into focus a key subject for the future of India. Mr. Raman, great focus on the very right issues which India needs to get its arms around going forward. I call the MSME and the Startup India as the heartthrob of India. It is the future of making India's economy grow at much faster rate and building a system of a new world entrepreneurship and creating new jobs of the kind we have never seen before. And therefore, the timing of this meeting, when India reaches 75 years and moves into what the Prime Minister wonderfully describes as the Amrit Kal, is extremely opportune. Mr. Raman, you rightly highlighted the importance of talent, technology, and of course, capital as the key matters around which the future ecosystems, whether it's startups or whether it's micro, small, and medium enterprises, will develop. And therefore, we need to focus on that. I think capital is something which we can reliably depend on SIDBI amongst others. But we need to also create a proper framework for ensuring that the best of technology and the best of talent is available for this ecosystem. I describe the current phase at which India is and our startup system is to a phase which goes back to the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century and as we moved into the 20th century. Some of you may recollect that till the year 1900, the world was dependent on its transportation mainly on horses. And it is the development of the automobile happened around the 1900 mark. And friends, what was a world dominated by horses for transportation, within a period of 10 to 15 years, the horses were eliminated from transporting, and we saw the automobile completely take over. This is the kind of transition the world is, from horses to cars. But 100+ years later, with a twist, it is no longer horses to combustion engine cars. It is from horses to the electric car world. And we are also at a time where the speed at which embracing of technology does not take 10 or 15 or 20 years as it did on those days. It happens at a much smaller gap. And therefore, my strong recommendation is to all the players in the startup and the MSME ecosystem is, friends, the opportunity is huge, but the speed at which change is happening is also much faster. Therefore, move on with your ideas, take things in your hands, and make things happen at great speed. The other important area is capital. We think about capital as debt in most of the times, especially in the MSME system. Capital can be in the form of debt or equity. And one of the things I would strongly encourage entrepreneurs, and I think we have seen a lot of that in the startup system, is to significantly increase the equity component of the capital structure of MSMEs. That is what gives you the shock absorption capacity as you go forward. And therefore, do not be shy in raising some equity capital, because that will be your backbone when things get tough. And it is here, Mr. Raman, that I think SIDBI and the financial system can play a significant role. A very large part of the risk equity capital in the startup and the MSME ecosystem is still dependent on global flows. We need to increase the amounts of domestic savings into capital for MSMEs and startups. I know SIDBI has been doing a lot of work, but we need to continue focusing on it and doing a lot more in terms of building a stronger ecosystem for domestic capital for MSMEs and startups. And it is here that the question of the role of entrepreneurs comes in. And being an entrepreneur myself, I have seen that this is a role which has to be handled with care. Many entrepreneurs have great creative ideas and start wonderfully well. Often they lose their way. They get carried away. And it is extremely important that we combine the concept to a professional entrepreneurship. My word of recommendation to every entrepreneur is, as you scale up, you need to combine professionalism with entrepreneurship. And my recommendation to every professional is have a little bit of entrepreneur in you. The future is in the hands of professional entrepreneurs. Therefore, entrepreneurs, go ahead with your great ideas. Be creative. Create something which is new, but combine it with an element of professionalism so that as you grow, you can be sustainably able to grow. And if you get initial success, please do not get carried away. Build on it. Build it sustainably and make sure that you have got professionals with you, and you yourself have a professional approach in addition to your creative spirits. I also see a major change in the MSME system and the mindsets of the policymakers. There was a time where India kept MSMEs as MSMEs forever. And entrepreneurs like to remain MSMEs because they got all the benefits. I think we have now created a system where MSMEs are encouraged to grow and become large companies. And for all the viewers and readers of the Economic Times, please keep in mind that once upon a time, a Facebook, a Microsoft, a Amazon, a Apple or a Google were all small startups, some of them in garages, which have become giant companies of the world. Indian startups need to have an aspiration to build themselves, maybe starting in a small way, but becoming large and having a huge footprint across the Indian economy. And that's the kind of growth aspiration we must have. And Mr. Raman, with some of the successes you may get in SIDBI, I think you will have the opportunity of not only dealing with a small, medium, and micro enterprises, but some of them you will see the joy of making them big companies, being the foundations of India's future. And the last point, friends, before I conclude today, is the fundamental ethos of the Indian enterprise has changed. Historically, enterprise in India was very often started with some sort of an arbitrage, whether it was a tax arbitrage or some imperfection in the marketplace. We need to change our approach from that of jugaad and arbitrage to creating something which is sustainable, customer-centric, and defining. And that's the change which we need to see in the MSMEs mindsets, rather than just having a quick arbitrage coming out of whatever reason, including tax arbitrage at times. So with that, I will end my points today. And I wish this conference a great success. And once again, compliment SIDBI and the Economic Times for bringing out this initiative at a crucial juncture for India. And I'm sure, Mr. Raman and the Economic Times, that both of you will also host every year in the Amrit Kal, and certainly at the completion of 100 years. Thank you very much, and namaste and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Kotak, for providing us with some wonderful insights about the MSME sector and the emerging trends. On behalf of SIDBI and ET, we sincerely thank you for participating in the summit. And now, dear viewers, it's our honor and pleasure to invite our guest of honor, Shri Jayant Sinha, Honorable Member of Parliament, to address our August gathering today. Mr. Sinha is the Member of Parliament from Jharkhand, India. He is also the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Finance that has oversight of the Ministry of Finance, Corporate Affairs, Statistics and Program Implementation, and the Niti Aayog, the government planning agency. In the past, he has also been a venture capitalist and has a deep understanding of the MSME and startup sector. A very warm welcome, sir.
Namaskar, everyone. I'm very glad that you're joining us for this wonderful program that SIDBI has put together. And it is always a great honor and privilege to speak after Shri Uday Kotak ji. I'm sure he must have enlightened you with his views on how India's economy and particularly the MSME sector is likely to do over the next few years. Let me also add a few thoughts about the MSME ecosystem. As many of you might know, I worked as a venture capitalist for many years before I entered public life. So I have been tracking and following the Indian MSME ecosystem for decades now. And I must say, this is a wonderful time to be an MSME. And I'm very glad that SIDBI is supporting the MSME ecosystem. We all know that India's MSMEs are the backbone of our economy, with over 6 crore MSMEs representing more than 10 crore people working in the MSME sector and contributing some 30 to 40% of India's GDP. The MSME ecosystem is truly India's economic backbone. We have over the past many years undertaken significant steps to strengthen the MSME ecosystem. SIDBI is the anchor of this ecosystem and provided many important services and resources for the MSME ecosystem. And I think we'll continue to do that in the future. But if we have to build a prosperous India an India that provides high quality employment for its people and also moves towards the vision of Atmanirbharta as laid out by our Honorable Prime Minister. Our MSME ecosystem must flourish, it must thrive, it must become even more vibrant, and SIDBI will be vital to that undertaking. SIDBI will make a very important contribution to doing that. Right now, as we look at our MSME sector, we find 2 or 3 areas where it is very important that we provide additional support to the MSME ecosystem. First, the biggest problem I think our MSMEs face is delayed payments by various entities that they work for, whether it is governments, large corporations, or even in some cases, their smaller customers. We find across the board that MSMEs are getting their payments much later than they should be getting, and also have to deal with a lot of hassles when it comes to receiving payments. So one of the areas that we need to further strengthen to make our MSME ecosystem more vibrant is to ensure that people are paid on time, that they're paid without any hassles, and that those payments come digitally directly into their bank account, so that once a contract is secured, invoices are presented, those payments come seamlessly without much trouble. So payments remain, I think, a very big pain point for our MSME sector. The second major pain point for our MSME ecosystem is formalization and digitization. The more we formalize and digitize the way we do business, the easier and the more friction-free doing business becomes. And remember, we are competing with the best companies in the world, not just companies in India. And when we are competing with the best companies in the world, they are able to do their businesses with very little friction in a very seamless way. And so we have to provide the same level of seamless service to our MSME ecosystem as well. So the second big challenge, of course, remains digitization, formalization, and enabling companies to be able to do business seamlessly. The third area that we need to work on is financing of all types. And when I say financing of all types, I include in it working capital financing, which of course gets aggravated as you deal with payment issues. I mean financing from an equity perspective, so that MSMEs, if they want to scale and grow and be able to sell parts of their companies and bring in equity investors, that they have access to equity investments. And third, of course, I mean long-term credit, long-term debt. So if I want to start a factory or I want to invest in a large machine, I'm able to borrow against that machine, that factory, and be able to do long-term collateralized lending. So we need to be able to make sure that whether it is working capital financing, equity financing, or debt financing of various types, that those are freely and abundantly available to our MSME ecosystem, and they're available at an affordable rate. And again, as I said, in a friction-free manner. These are, to my mind, some of the biggest challenges that our MSMEs are facing right now. If we can digitize and formalize our MSMEs, they will get access to better credit, they will be able to do business more easily, and at the same time will be able to grow and expand their businesses. Those are some of the big challenges that we face. Now, you'll be pleased to know that the Standing Committee on Finance, which I chair, and which is a committee of parliament, and that includes members from both the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, has been working on a report for MSMEs for quite a period of time. And we have identified these as being the central challenges that the MSME ecosystem is facing right now. We are planning to come out with recommendations to address these challenges. And we are hoping that we are going to be able to create a digital platform, a set of digital infrastructure for our MSMEs that will enable them to digitize, formalize their businesses. And once they digitize and formalize their businesses even further, take advantage of the India Stack, take advantage of the Udayam portal and other digital infrastructure that is being built up very, very quickly for MSMEs and for businesses in general, then they will be able to access credit of various kinds much, much more easily, because their businesses will run transparently, their businesses will be tracked well, and if there are issues around payments, we will be able to find those companies that are doing business with the MSME sector but are not paying on time. And here, what we need to do is we need to take the idea of the digitized GSTN invoice and make that as prevalent as possible. Once we digitize our invoices and really move towards the kind of invoicing that is envisioned under GST, then we will be able to find those payers that are not paying on time. And when they don't pay on time, that knowledge, that history of their payments will become widely available to everybody in the ecosystem. And so MSMEs will then have the ability to assess whether they want to do business with that company or not, which is consistently paying late. And once a company is identified as not paying on time, paying in 90 days, 120 days, 180 days, then it will become clear that we are in effect financing that company's working capital, and that will become something that will be a red flag or perhaps an amber flag that will enable people to avoid doing business with that particular company or with that particular entity. So digitizing and formalizing the payment of invoices through the TREADS platform, which we had recommended through our committee, through GSTN, is, I think, one of the best ways we will have of managing payments and making sure that there is transparency around who pays and when. So that will enable us to address that first big challenge that I spoke about, which is being able to find out who's paying on time and who's not paying on time. The second major thing that I think we will be suggesting is to further enhance and strengthen the Udayam portal. By further enhancing and strengthening the Udayam portal, enabling companies to register there, to be able to transact and be identified with a single KYC, we will make a lot of business much more friction-free, much more transparent, and it'll make life a lot easier for our MSME ecosystem. So that's the second important area that we need to emphasize, which is to strengthen the Udayam portal. And third, there are already a series of programs that are available through SIDBI, such as the ECLGS scheme, the credit guarantee scheme, the fund of funds for equity financing. All of these schemes will be strengthened further, should be strengthened further, so that more equity financing is available for the MSME ecosystem. Credit financing is available, and if necessary, working capital through factoring is also available. These are some of the major recommendations that are coming through from our discussions with members of the MSME ecosystem. And we are very much hoping that we will be able to, through the government, take swift action in all of this. It is very important to also recognize that if indeed we have to build these elements of the MSME ecosystem, that SIDBI itself be strengthened. SIDBI is the anchor of the MSME ecosystem. We need to expand SIDBI. We need to expand SIDBI's balance sheet, and we need to enable SIDBI to help MSMEs further digitize and formalize their business, and also get access to credit mechanisms and equity funding alternatives of various kinds. If we strengthen SIDBI, provide SIDBI the resources, provide SIDBI the field organizations so that they can assist companies, not just in the big metros of Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Calcutta, but smaller companies in India's tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns, where the bulk and the vast majority of our MSMEs are. If we expand SIDBI's organization to be in cities like my very own Hazaribagh, which I represent in the Lok Sabha, then we will be able to assist MSMEs in a very hands-on, direct way, as exactly where they are and exactly where they're doing businesses. So SIDBI's role in the MSME ecosystem is extraordinarily important, and we really do want SIDBI to expand and become, like NABARD has become, a very important agency supporting the growth of this very important sector. I'm sure as you go through and attend more sessions and learn more about how the government, under the very able leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji and the Honorable Finance Minister Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, is bringing in policies to support the MSME sector, and of course all of the different vibrant initiatives that are being undertaken by the MSME ecosystem, you will all agree that this is a golden time for the MSME ecosystem. The future is very, very bright. And most importantly, we're here to support you and assist you in every way possible so that you can grow and flourish. And as you grow and flourish, India grows with you and we build the Atmanirbhar Bharat of our dreams. Thank you very, very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for sparing your precious time for this event and providing very lucid insight into the various issues of MSMEs, which the government is working for solutions. We are indeed indebted by your presence at the event. And now, ladies and gentlemen, after that wonderful inaugural session, we will now start our two-panel discussions, where we have several policymakers, industry leaders, bankers, investors, and technocrats. A large number of Indian MSMEs are in a position to follow ambitious growth trajectory and contribute significantly to the economic growth of India. There could be many breakout stories of manufacturing MSMEs crossing 250 crore rupees revenue milestone and many more breaking into the 100 crore rupees territory. Our next panel discussion on Springboard at 75 for MSMEs will deliberate on key essentials of the policy springboard for MSMEs to facilitate this journey by improving access to adequate growth finance, improving competitiveness, technology adoption, moving up value chain, facilitating partnerships or collaborations, etc. I would like to invite Mr. Amol Dete, editor, ET-BFSI and ET-CFO, to moderate this panel discussion. And it's my pleasure to invite the panelists now. Mr. Anil Kumar Sharma, Executive Director, RBI. Mr. Ramesh Iyer, Vice Chairman and Managing Director, Mahindra and Mahindra Financial Services. Mr. Shrikant Somani, Chairman, CII, National MSME Council. Mr. S. Raman, Chairman and Managing Director, SIDBI. Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, Managing Director and CEO, AU Small Finance Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, this session will be followed by a Q&A session. You can drop your questions in the chat box. Our moderator will take the questions at the end of the discussion, subject to the availability of time. Else, we will forward your questions to the respective speakers after the conference. Now, I'll hand it over to Amol to take the discussion ahead. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Smriti, for that introduction. And I'm sure the audience is truly enjoying this summit, as Mr. Kotak and Mr. Sinha, pointed out or highlighted many important aspects. Mr. Raman, in his opening remarks, also kind of briefed how the MSME sector is, and he compared India's MSMEs with the China. So best of the times for the India, because we are talking and celebrating the Amrit Mahotsav era, and more importantly, we are also embracing a vision of next 25 years. It's very important to speak about the sector, which is truly a backbone of the Indian economy today, because the sector caters to informal economy than the formal economy more, and employs more than 100 million people in different segments. In today's session, we'll discuss more about how to strengthen the Indian MSMEs and empower them to achieve new goals over the next 25 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, as Smriti has introduced all the speakers, I will save some time and ask a few common questions first and then get into the specific questions. So, gentlemen, glad to have you here. And I will first start with a common question. The common question is specifically about the current state of Indian MSMEs. And the question is to all of you. The question is, how important is India's MSME sector for the economy, and how far can it grow? How do you see the domestic and global opportunities for the MSME sector, and how how Indian MSMEs are in the best times? I will start with you, Mr. Sharma, and have your opening remarks on this question.
Thank you, Amol. As you know, the MSMEs play a huge and important role in the Indian economy in terms of employment opportunities at a comparatively lower cost of capital, industrialization of the rural areas through the expansion of the ancillary industries, equitable economic growth, which is important. Because otherwise, if the MSMEs come up, equity will increase. They act as engine of growth, looking at the employment they provide. To a large number, there are more than 6 crore MSMEs and close to 11 to 12 crores employment is provided, next only to agriculture. So there is a huge importance and huge potential they have for the Indian economy. They contribute 45% of the exports, the manufacturing which is taking place in the economy. 45% of the manufacturing output is coming out of the MSMEs. 40% of the exports, in fact, more than 40% of the exports come out of the MSMEs, and they contribute more than 28% of GDP. So this is the importance of the industry. But unfortunately, because while this sector is important, there is a huge credit gap. The credit requirement of the sector vis-a-vis the credit which is flowing to the sector, there is a huge mismatch. IFC had come out with an estimation in 2018 which said that the credit gap in the MSME sector is to the close of 2,58,000 crores. That's a huge number. So there are many reasons. If you have time, if you give me 2-3 minutes, I can get into the reasons why MSMEs are in the current state, because you said that what is the current state of the MSMEs. So I'll take a minute to dwell on that, and that is there are problems for this credit gap, and some of these problems are specific to the MSMEs. For example, the lack of formalization is one of the important factors. Small size of the MSMEs, more than 90% are small and micro. Poor technology which most of the MSMEs employ. Because they employ poor technology, the quality of the product which they have, that is not very good. The finish is not very good. They lack that innovative touch which some of the imported products have. Because of this, they are not able to market the products as fast as they should. And even if all the factors are not there, even they have been able to sell their products to a big corporate, there is a question of delayed payments. So these are some of the specific issues pertaining to MSMEs which affect their ability to take credit from the formal financial sector. Coming to bank-specific causes for this low flow of credit, the most important constraint with the banks face is their difficulty they have in assessment of the credit worthiness of the borrower. They are small borrowers. There is an information asymmetry because lack of formalization is there, and informality that I mentioned. The books of account are not maintained in a proper form by most of the small enterprises. Documentation is not proper. Cash flows are not documented. They are irregular. So these are the problems which banks face. Then there is a higher operating cost in terms of small units and small accounts spread all over the country. So following up and monitoring is an issue. Higher cost of credit is another factor, because any downturn in the economy, the first segment to be affected are the MSMEs and micro and small units. So the higher cost of credit is another factor. And there is one more factor which is responsible for this lack of adequate flow of credit, and that is the poor infrastructure which exists at the ground level. You must have heard of the industrial clusters. You go to the industrial cluster, you see the kind of infrastructure that is there. A few of them are functioning properly, but most of them are either on paper or even if they are on the ground, they are not properly populated. The facilities which they should have in terms of testing, in terms of certification, in terms of tooling requirements, in terms of training, etc., they are not adequate. If you speak to any of the entrepreneurs, they say we don't even get people who can run our machines which we have imported from, let's say, Germany or America. So this is the state. With all these factors, MSME, banks, and infrastructure, they contribute towards this particular part. What has been done? What can be done? I think most of you will be aware. The improving infrastructure obviously is one, making these clusters adequately provided with all the necessary infrastructure, setting off industry specific clusters and ensuring that they work efficiently, increasing the formality which after the new definition of the MSMEs has come and the Udyam portal has been launched where the registration has been made mandatory. So hopefully going forward, the formality in the sector will improve. But the most important thing which will benefit the MSMEs and also benefit the banks in providing credit to the MSMEs would be in the form of adopting technology. Adopting technology for the MSMEs is very specific, but adopting technology by the banks will have a couple of layers. One of them would be it will address the information asymmetry. For example, capturing of the cash flows. For example, capturing the payment history of the MSME entry, which they can do by linking to the GSTN network, to the income tax network, to the credit bureaus, and to the fraud registry. If they can get these linkages, then they will be able to capture the payment history and the record and the credit record of the MSME and will be in a position to assess their credit worthiness. Second thing which banks can use by adopting technologies to leverage fintech by through P2P lending platforms, tying up with the account aggregators, collaborate with the fintech technologies, and we in RBI have also launched a regulatory sandbox where MSME lending is one of the cohorts which has been launched. And another issue which I mentioned in the last was the delayed payments. So the MSME is supplied to a big corporate, the big corporate has not paid on time. So the MSME doesn't have, its cash flows are impacted. So for that, we had launched a TREDS platform wherein the MSME supplier can onboard, the corporate buyer can onboard, and there is a financer in the form of the bank which is available. So this requires onboarding by all the corporates, which unfortunately wasn't happening. So in 2018, Government came out with a direction that all the corporates with more than 500 crores of turnover must necessarily onboard on the TREDS platform. The compliance has been tardy, but this matter is being pursued. In 2021, with the amendment to the Factoring Act, now in addition to banks, even the NBFC, in addition to banks and the NBFC factors, even the NBFC non-factors, they also would be able to onboard on TREDS platform, and they'll be able to provide finance. So these are some of the measures which we have taken. There was an expert committee on the MSMEs, UK Sena committee, which submitted its report in 2019. They had given 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 recommendations. If time permits, or maybe subsequently I can come and discuss what we have implemented, but I'll stop here.
No, sure. I think remarkable highlights, Mr. Sharma. You not only just highlighted the challenges, but the measures that the RBI has taken. Obviously, I will come back to you with some specific points there in terms of the the new regulations that you're crafting there. Thank you, but so much, Mr. Sharma. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sharma is, a veteran regulator. I must say he has been with RBI since more than 18 years and, handling many profiles there. Let me move ahead with Mr. Iyer, who comes from, again, a remarkable background of the NBFC. He's heading Mahindra Finance since last 25 years and with the Mahindra Group as a key member. Mr. Iyer, I would like to take your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, is my voice clear or it's cracking? Otherwise, I'll go off video for some time.
No, it is perfect, sir. Please go.
Okay. So, Mr. Sharma already laid out the importance, and I personally do believe that it's extremely, extremely important that without the SME prospering, the overall growth is going to be very, very difficult. And therefore, there's no doubt in our minds that SME is extremely an important element of the overall growth. They definitely kind of generate so much of employment, and we do a lot of activity in rural. And I can tell you the kind of entrepreneurs who come from there. The only point that I would make is we will have to kind of recognize their challenges, and somewhere we will have to create an ecosystem which supports them. Mr. Sharma also talked about the payments which doesn't come to them on time, and therefore they become delayed customer and not a defaulting customer by intention. And unfortunately, there is no clear recognition for a circumstantial default to an intentional default. And both are NPA at a point of time. And therefore, someone who is wanting to provide them more credit, because an SME has got a cash flow problem at a point of time, and he requires additional funds to come out of the situation. But if he has not paid the earlier installments for some reason, and purely circumstantial reason, you give him more money, even the further money given becomes an NPA. So it becomes a challenge for the overall credit system to be able to support. So, and without a proper credit support to the SME and a continuous credit support to SME, it is going to be extremely challenging for them to innovate, to invest in technology. And that's the reason I find some of the SMEs, even though they are very entrepreneurial, but they are very traditional in their approach because they do not have so much of cash flow to be able to invest in so many alternate requirements, even in very high manpower, quality manpower. So they try and manage with whatever little is available to them. So I think there is a need for somewhere overall relooking at the support to SMEs or MSMEs from a very different point of view and from a very circumstantial point of view, and bring that pragmatic need for these MSME, and then you would see them prosper because they are all phenomenally energetic. They are all people who can come out with some wonderful solutions, and they are able to kind of produce things with the fastest of time frame. I mean, I have seen some of them who have been given certain developmental product. They are the fastest to come back to the OEMs and say, we have already developed it, and it crosses the quality barometers as well. Now, the overall ecosystem has to recognize all of their requirements, and credit flow is something that we'll have to make it available to them a little more, smoothly. And then they should not be possibly subjected to a similar regulation that an organized player can be subjected to. And if they're going to be subjected to a similar regulation, it's going to be challenging. Like, for example, if we expect that they should have a high credit rating, their size may not be sufficient enough to be even able to go and get a rating. Now, as NBFCs, we are willing to look at those kind of customers because we look at their cash flow and not necessarily look at only the document part of it. But then we get stuck if some of the SME is going to underperform in their cash flow and they, for a reason, temporarily do become an NPA, then we start withdrawing from that segment. And then how will that SME then get the support? So my complete thesis is that the overhauling of the SME support from every angle is possibly required, and that would therefore push their growth substantially high because their growth is extremely essential for an overall growth. So from an importance perspective, I would be 10 on 10 for them. And therefore, my request would be that all of us need to come together and relook at how do we really engage with them, understand their problems more pragmatically, and then maybe come back to the drawing board and say what should be a specific solution or a regulatory framework for them so that they get all the support that we are looking for. So I would stop there. Thank you.
Sure. I think meaningful points, Mr. Iyer. Thanks for adding that. Let me move ahead now and get some industry perspective. So let me come to you, Mr. Somani. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Somani is just not the chairman of CII National MSME Council, but he's also the chairman and managing director of Somani Ceramics Limited, India's leading manufacturer of tiles, sanitary ware, and bath fittings. Mr. Somani, obviously, my first question is how important is India's MSME sector for the economy and how far it can grow? I just repeated it for the sake of your information, and I would like to have your comments here.
Thank you very much indeed. The previous two speakers have outlined the importance and also the problems that the MSMEs are facing. From a perspective of looking at what has happened in the past 2 years, I think we can look at it from, it's been a two-way street. The pandemic has been a two-way street, and we can possibly define them as a pre-COVID situation and a post-COVID situation. Now, one can always look at the woes and the problems that MSMEs have faced. Undoubtedly, I think everyone here would agree that the biggest problems or this is a sector which has been harmed the most. However, looking at the future, I think it has also thrown a lot of opportunities. I mean, I think India would not have seen what it is seeing today, and it's important that we all look at these opportunities as a possibility of helping the MSMEs and bringing our MSMEs to world standards. The challenges which have been outlined are the same as I would probably would say is the disruption in the commodity prices, disruption in the supply chain, higher working capital requirements, payments being delayed. These are some things, a few things which have really hampered the growth of the MSMEs through these periods. But nevertheless, government, from their point of view, have also come and given a few, help. In the budget, they've got this surety bonds which could be substituted at bank guarantees. Then the creds, as they said, that many of the public sectors and private sectors must, and I insist, must register in creds. The market critical area, which we've seen, is a new normal, a plethora of opportunities which are coming to support the MSMEs and reach their, get them to being a global supply chain. So how do we do this? Okay. We look at it from the point of view as one of the major areas that we look at is the technology shift. I think, and at CII, we've taken this as a very important measure to help. But not only through the policy advocacy that we take with the government, but also through our own programs that we are doing. We've been looking at various ways of hand-holding MSMEs and taking them to the digital technology adoption. MSMEs are quick to learn, but they have difficulties, and they need hand-holding. On the point of finance, I think what Mr. Iyer said about recognizing the importance of how to give loans to make it easier for MSMEs, I think one of the important things that I see is rating. The rating mechanism of MSMEs cannot be the same as large industries. We have to look at them completely differently, which will make things easier for them. I probably feel that if we are able to get technology adoption, easy finance, we need to have a fund of funds for adoption of technology. I think we, in our country, with the 63.5 million MSMEs, out of which 99% are micro, I think we have to find a way of moving the micros to small and the small to medium. We need to build a greater eco structure within the companies and how to help these MSMEs. I'll stay at this for the time being. When I do hope that this program will certainly bring a few aspects of the possibilities where we can bring MSMEs to where we want them to be. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Somani, and I can see more people are joining this conversation. I would request people, those who have any specific questions for specific speakers, please share it in the chat window. I'll try my best to take this question. Moving ahead, I will bring here a banker, Mr. Agrawal, who is a veteran banker and heading, EU Small Finance Bank, which is India's largest small finance bank. And he's also first-generation entrepreneur, a true visionary and a pioneer of financial inclusion, and one of India's most dynamic self-made business leaders. Mr. Agrawal, I'm sure you must be dealing with a lot of SMEs and MSMEs because the whole focus of Small Finance Bank is on that segment. So I would like to now take your view.
Thank you, Amol. So I just want to second what Anilji, Rameshji and Somani ji has told about the whole requirement, the importance of MSMEs in India. If India want to become 5 trillion economy next 2-3 years, the MSME has to fire. But my assessment of them, while dealing in last 20-25 years, is that they suffer capital, right? Because largely I have seen that MSME don't have risk capital with them. They either are running their businesses because of hard collaterals, which we as a banker or we as a financial institution does not want to take it as a very high on their balance sheet. But I think the capital formation for MSME is so important, right? And I know the CMD sir is there. So I would urge him to talk to the government or any institutions who actually provide more risk capital for them, so that lending becomes easy. Lending is a follow-up game. Right? Lending cannot be a prime source for any business to build. Right, the prime source has to figure out how the capital is formed, because if capital is formed in the balance sheet, then money will flow to you. Money will flow to you. Every banker, every institution, right? And second important thing is this: that how competitive they are. Because generally India is a self-employed kind of country. We have 6 crores and we want to grow more, right? So whether every MSME is good enough to survive, So generally when meet people, right, I find them non-viable. Their product is not having any USP. They are running their business very on thin margins, and any accident happens around their business, their cash flows, or their personal challenges, and their business goes down the hill, right? And that happened in pandemic. So I think how we make them aware about that, what are their USPs? I think it's about knowledge, right? Why you are into business, where you want to take on, right? And is it a being beyond your livelihood, right? Either you are just doing for your livelihood, or you really want to make some big around it, right? I think that has to be more, told to them or handled by, any of the institutions around us. That's how to live through this world, right? And third, of course, governance, because largely, honestly, in this kind of people, governance is by choice. It's not by design, right? And now, but GST, much formalization happening. So people are coming straight on the balance sheet, and easy for us to really understand them, and really easy for us to lend them, right? So I would say the governance for MSME should not be a choice. They should follow the governance formula by paying everything on paper, so that the capital can come in, or then of course the loan can come in, right? So I think these are three things which I personally believe that if MSMEs can work around it through some association, through some institutions, or through any kind of thing, right? Then the India can go beyond a point, because I don't agree, to be very honest, that credit is not there. I hear many news around that, credit flow is not there, but I'm in the industry for the last 25 years. Every corner of this country has NBFC office. Every corner of this country has banks, right? But just go to banks and NBFCs, they are not able to judge them. So I think it's not about the availability of financial institutions, it's about how we judge them, and how MSMEs are also coming very honestly on table, right? So I think it's a partnership which we need to work upon, where MSMEs, institutions, and the knowledge partners, the governance guys, and all these people come together to really handle and to the next levels. So that's my view, Amol.
Sure, Mr. Agrawal. And I think during the ESL schemes which the government launched, many PSU banks, disbursed a good amount of credit in last 1 to 1.5 years. I think we took views from the regulator, the industry, the NBFC, the bank, and now let me take the views from the facilitator actually, who's working as a nodal agency and giving a big boost to the MSMEs and the small businesses in the country. So you heard it right, Mr. Raman. I would like to take your opinion, but let me tweak the question slightly. Obviously, because you mentioned about the Indian MSMEs in your keynote remarks. So my question to you, Mr. Raman, is, MSME is a very diversified sector. It has a very large informal segment, as also mentioned by Mr. Sinha in his speech. So what are the policy initiatives that SIDBI and other stakeholders are planning in this segment?
Thank you. And you've really put your finger on the, pulse. So if we're talking 6.5 crore enumerated business units, 1.5 crore are those who are probably getting funds. So, whether it be, the small finance banks or the NBFC, which Mr. Iyer represents, or for that matter, the classical commercial banks. All of them are catering to probably that 1.5 crore of formalized MSMEs, which have got GST, and therefore they have a PAN number, and they have probably understood exactly how the business is to run. It's essential for us to make that group move up the value chain. In fact, if we're looking at 3 trillion economy becoming a 5 trillion economy in a very short period of time, then it is these large units within the MSME space that have to fire and really sort of push up their turnovers, increase their exports, etc.
Right.
We then have the 5 crore, which we are talking about as the informal sector, and this is spread across the country. They have the hunger. In fact, that point was taken and brought out very well, that these people have the hunger for growth. Now, how do we help them? And that's really what I think we've heard today from all the other panelists. I can only say that in my interactions with both industry, the lenders, the MSMEs, the government, there are several schemes. There is a lot of interest. In fact, the finance minister herself yesterday talked about how we need to reach out at the lowest levels to make the smallest of nano and tiny entities come into the fold. So what I would call as KYC ready and credit ready. That's something important for us to make happen for that 5 crore number of entities. Hopefully, over a period of time, many of them will start going into the GST stream because of the sheer benefits that their buyers will get. And therefore, the automatic invoicing on a GST platform should start happening. But they are still far away from that. The good part is whether it is MSME ministry or the skills ministry or the DFS and the RBI, of course, you heard Mr. Sharma speak about it yourself. Everybody is talking in a unidirection, but we need to make things happen on the ground, and that's really where SIDBI can play its role. So we have already come to a very advanced level of arrangement with the MSME ministry such that formalization of these very vast number of small entities can start happening. The sheer benefit of getting that Udyam registration done is the fact that all the bankers in the room would be directly be able to benefit through the PSL, that is the priority sector loan, and therefore one would expect a flow of credit moving a little faster than what is probably happening today. The other part is really important. I think both the speakers in their inaugural address spoke about that. Seed capital. Now, the startup economy is something which we have seen boom. I mean, SIDBI has been, playing its role in giving the money from the fund of funds of the government of India. We have approximately 800 companies who have received funds from about 80 AIFs into whom SIDBI has given funds. So 6,800 crores has been given out to 80 AIFs, and in turn, they have invested. Already we're seeing those returns. We have 10 unicorns from amongst those investments made. But this is really a very small microcosm. I mean, we need to deepen this relationship significantly. And that's really where we are now talking more about seed capital, which is that 10 lakh rupees or that 20 lakh rupees, which goes into a company that sees the success. Till then, it's only friends and family where the money is coming from. A bank has obviously not touched him. We need to start holding hands at that level. And I think that's really an important point. I can keep talking about it, but I think, from a large macro point of view, it's essential that seed capital, other forms of investments come into the MSME sector, which typically the banking sector finds it difficult to do. So we need multiple lenders, and I think that's already happened. The MFIs as a lender are playing their role. The NBFCs are straddling a wide sector of the economy, and the banks are probably focused on the large corporates, but they're equally fueling the MSMEs. So I think we need to probably look at more credit coming from larger number of entities at different segments, and that's something which can be deepened. So I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Okay, very well said, Mr. Raman, and I think that ends with the first open remarks, detailed points from all of you. Now let me ask some specific questions, and I will start with you, Mr. Sharma. You highlighted really important points that the MSME sector is facing right now in the country. As a regulator, if I ask you specifically, what is that now we can expect from RBI? We understand that the third court have been already opened, which, of the sandbox, which specifically caters to the MSMEs. But, to smoothen the lending, what are the steps that the RBI is taking in towards digital lending? What is it that, we can expect from RBI going ahead?
Yeah, on promoting digital lending and adoption of technology, which can facilitate some of the constraints which banks have and lending institutions in particular have in assessing the the credit worthiness of the MSME, etc. So, as I mentioned briefly, the P2P lending platforms which are there. So they are, I mean, in the media there were reports that they are adopting practices which were not very proper. and there were issues with respect to data integrity, excessive charges, and arm twisting in terms of recovery, etc., etc. So you would have seen that we've said that they have to adhere with the fair practices code, which we have stipulated for the NBFCs and the banks, and they have to do this lending activity only in tie-up with the banks and NBFCs. And for any of the actions taken by the P2P which is in violation, the bank and the NBFC, whichever they have tied up with, they'll be responsible. So that's one thing which we've done. Similarly, account aggregators, they have been set up in the sense that they will take, or they will be the custodians of all the information, financial information of a particular customer of any financial entity. And if this information would be available to any other financial entity which wants to use that information to establish or set up a financial relationship. So that will facilitate actually in a great way sourcing of the credit. Institutions would be able to get the information with the consent of the person whose information it is, and then initiate the proposal or the relationship, whatever it might be. Similarly, the banks and the NBFCs are collaborating with the fintech. Not only collaborating with the fintech, but also they might set up their own digital business units. Kind of verticals. Each bank may they take their own different positions on that, but essentially either they collaborate with the digital financial technical companies, or they can set up their own digital units within that. So that you must have seen in the budget announcement that these digital banking units would be set up going forward. Similarly, as I very briefly mentioned, there is a regulatory sandbox which we run. There have been the third cohort in that is on the MSME lending. So we expect that something useful in terms of the process efficiency, in terms of accessing the thus far excluded segments, how to access them, how to overcome some of the issues which we discussed in the previous segment, if they can be addressed leveraging technology. So that should be possible from there. And on the issue of TREDS and the delayed platform, in addition to the basic framework which I said, there is an MSME, there is a corporate buyer and the bank. Now, going forward, all NBFCs will be able to onboard on that platform. In addition to that, we've also said that TREDS can actually establish the linkages between the GSTN and other such networks which are available, so that any information which they require, or any financier requires any information, that should be possible. For example, if the financing bank on the TREDS platform has to register a charge with the CERSAI, then it should be possible for the TREDS to get it done instead of bank doing for every transaction, which can be a process inefficiency. So those kind of steps we are taking, and we will continue to take to make TREDS much more successful and much more efficient, to make it win-win situation for all of them. In terms of increasing the credit flow, we have revamped the entire co-lending model, where the banks and the NBFCs come together. Banks, as you know, have the advantage of low cost of funds. NBFCs have the advantage of last mile connectivity. So, but they have a high cost. So it's a win-win situation where the banks and the NBFC can come together. They can have a policy on co-lending, and as per that policy, they can either they can take over an already sourced loan by an NBFC, or both of them can join. They agree that how the NBFC is going to source a loan, and thereafter they can share a loan in whichever format they can share. But 20% of the loan must remain with the NBFC. So earlier we had this co-lending model, but there were a lot of operational restrictions. Now we have removed all such restrictions. The only stipulation which we have now is that the KYC requirements should be adhered to. If there is any other regulatory specific requirement in terms of IRAC norms, etc., they will follow that. But subject to these two or three regulatory conditions, rest every other issue is given up operational freedom. So this, I hope the banks and the NBFCs leverage this particular co-lending which we have come out with, and are able to bring the remaining 5 crore MSMEs which are outside the ambit of the formal financial institution into the formal sector. And if based on the feedback to co-lending, based on the feedback regarding TREDS or the P2P lending platforms and regulatory sandbox, whatever comes out of those, then we will continue to take action as the situation might be.
Okay, again, I think detailed points, and you highlighted, I think, all the policy measures that I think the MSMEs are keen to understand more on that. So, Mr. Iyer, let me bring you here, and I want you to respond one important part, which most of the MSMEs face, and you being the largest NBFC, it will be really helpful for them. How do you think MSMEs should improve their credit score? Because most of the times MSMEs do not have, since they cater to informal sector, they do not have the basic criteria to apply for loans and also. As an NBFC, what do you think? Should we should the chronology that the MSMEs follow in terms of improving their credit score?
So, I guess poor fellows, they are doing what they can do to improve their score. I think the lenders have to find a way, how do we look at their score differently? For example, the way we lend to them, we don't necessarily look at only the credit score, we look at a proxy score. So you have to look at the promoter background, how long they have been in the business, what has been, their normal transaction approaches. My belief has always been, when you lend to somebody, don't just judge by whether they pay or they don't pay. Are they even available to you for a discussion when they don't pay, so that you can actually find a solution jointly? And we do a lot of work in rural, and the only way that we can lend in rural is by understanding their cash flow and not look for their financial statements readiness to be able to lend. And yes, we run the risk of carrying a higher NPA, and we put capital indirectly. We are putting capital on behalf of SME in our business, because they don't pay on time, and you need to carry the capital for that NPA. Now, unless we find a way to look at an SME portfolio outside of a very organized credit rating approach and use different proxy parameters to understand, you have to look at which business they are in and what is their underlying cash flow. Right? If suppose they are servicing, let's say, an auto industry, and they're working as a small component manufacturer, if currently auto industry says, I am not producing sufficient vehicle because I have a problem, his cash flows are directly impacted. And his credit score is going to be impacted in the next round. Now, if you are going to rely on this score to say, therefore, I won't lend to you, it's going to be very challenging for them to come out of the situation. So, therefore, they end up doing not the right things. They don't give you the right information. They are not available to discuss with you. Then you take some knee-jerk reaction and then push the SME into a bad segment. So, I repeat my point though, but I would think that SME lending, in my personal opinion, has to be a very interactive lending. And therefore, while digital data, all of that will play a very severe, important role, but it will be a phygital model. Unless the lender understands the promoter, unless the lender interacts with the promoter, unless the lender willing to accept and partner the customer in their difficult times. See, the challenge is that lenders partner you in good times and not necessarily partner you in the difficult times. But if you are a credit provider who is able to understand that challenge and partner them in difficult time, because today we carry a high NPA, because that's our ability, right? We can bring capital, we can explain to the investor, we can explain to rating agency, we can explain to the regulator as to what our problem is. But an individual is not able to do, and therefore he buckles. So to that question of how do you improve their credit rating, I think the fundamental question should be, how can the lender understand the business model and the needs of an SME little better and use proxy scores rather than just the absolute score?
Very well said. In fact, I think what you're saying is kind of pitching towards the cash flow lending. Very, detailed points there. I remember a conversation with a very branch manager of a very local bank, cooperative bank, and he says, for me, the biggest challenge is my customer from Konkan is different and my customer from Satara is different. And, I have to think about their cash flow, because somebody will have a cash flow only in the monsoon and somebody will not have a cash flow in the monsoon, right? I think very important points, Mr. Iyer, that you raised. Mr. Somani, you heard Mr. Sharma talking about various policy measures. You heard Mr. Iyer, how he's actually improving the credit score in terms of the banking and the financial institution sides. If I ask you specifically, what are the additional policy changes as an industry body that you expect from maybe RBI or the government of India, which you think will smoothen the whole lending for the MSMEs?
Yeah, thank you. If I had to put myself in the shoes of an MSME, I think I would first of all say that the government has done well in bringing about in their intention of helping the MSMEs. However, there are a couple of points that I would probably flag, and one of them would be the SIDBI-ET MSME scheme, which is the government had announced in this budget for 2 lakh crores. Perhaps this scheme could have been can be enhanced to 5 lakh crore from the current limited, and also bring about a way of data points to be released by the authorities, like a number of amounts of claims received, number of amount of claims settled, and time taken to settle, etc. This would be helpful in the performance and accountability and robust implementation of the scheme. Secondly, on the fund of funds which is being created, fund of funds, a corpus of 10,000 crore from the government, and another 40,000 crores has come from the PV and VC. Guidelines for these funds have already been issued, and we would probably feel that the implementation should be expedited for this fund. Third, we've, as an SME, as an institution, we've always been asking for a interest subvention of 2%. I think this would help go a long way in helping the MSMEs. On the front of technology, the CLCSS scheme is was highly beneficial for 15% upfront capital for the MSMEs and for technology upgradation. The scheme needs to be revived and continued benefit, for the MSMEs. But I also feel the formulation of a scheme for enhancing productivity through technology intervention for the MSMEs on the same lines as the MOM SMEs existing lean manufacturing scheme. This would be advantageous for the MSMEs as well. On the ease of doing business, which is one of the areas where the MSMEs find themselves wanting. So one thing, the government also been speaking of the single window system for MSMEs. This would be very helpful. Then exempt the MSMEs for the labor laws compliances for at least 2-3 years, because we need to get the MSMEs to understand how to put their businesses, their homes, literally to put their homes in order. We've got to give them some time. Then, of course, we've seen the ups and downs of raw materials, so there can be a mechanism to ensure raw material price stability. Now, these are things which perhaps could be very helpful as far as the MSMEs and their health is concerned. So that's what I would probably like to see.
Okay, noted your points, Mr. Somani. I think good highlights there. Mr. Agarwal, let me bring you back here in the conversation. You said sometime back, there is no dearth of the credit actually. So my question to you now is, since you deal with a lot of MSMEs, what are some of the major mistakes that you find that the growing MSMEs make, and what is your advice to them, to make a sustainable growth?
So it's Anmol, it's around that I find them over leveraged, right? And too much ambition, without a base of capital, and then, if you are not governed, you are not able to show us what sale you have, what buying you are doing, what is your ROE, what is your profit. It's difficult, right? And as Ramesh was telling about the interactive financing, let's discuss, let's figure out. But it doesn't happen on a scale, right? Because we as a lender also cannot train everybody to interact, right? Because it's very subjective then, some good credit guy can do a very good job and maybe somebody cannot, right? So there has to be a availability of data around MSMEs, data around capital, data around sales, data around customers, so I think my piece of advice to all MSMEs in this world now is this, that let's become more governed, right? Let's bring more capital, let's have clarity and trust on table, because the way the whole banking and financial system is being built in this country is so good, honestly, right? So the MSME has to take advantage of it, right? So if you can come very clear on the table, the turnaround time will be also very easy, right? So I think again, I will say that the capital on the balance sheet, the trust on your papers, dialogue with your lender will immensely improve you, right? And then second, how you actually also see your business, right? Because sometime when I meet MSMEs, they're just doing business for today and tomorrow, right? But can they think beyond time, right? Because sustainability is so important, right? Because we generally lend for 7-8 years. So how the market can be for next 5-7 years, how the interest rate cycles can move on. These are not easy subject, but MSME has to come to the terms because we are in the globalization. There are so many imports, exports, there are so many policy change, and this kind of pandemic, this kind of event, just change the whole landscape around you. So I think how they build themselves for future, is also important, which I don't know how to do it, because generally these guys are very self-employed. They just come from normal background, not much education around them. So I think somehow they have to prepare themselves for this tough competition, right? I think these are two things, I would advise them that, please bring the expertise around you so that, you can sustain in this world.
Oh, sure. I think the advice from a banker will always help MSMEs to build their, segment, to build their profile really well. Mr. Raman, let me come back to you now. And, I pick up one point from your speech in the morning, which is about MSMEs is equal to startups, or, vice versa, which is the phrase that you use. So let me build my question on the same. What is SIDBI's plan for alternate finance for seed and growth stage companies, maybe MSMEs or startups that do not easily get assistance from the banking sector?
That's a vital question, Amol. As I had mentioned, there are plans afoot where SIDBI would be working with the Ministry of MSME to kickstart a seed capital program. So this is a component of a much larger scheme, which the MSME ministry is rolling out, which largely focuses on designs and patents and IPRs, and to encourage a lot of MSMEs to come up with new ideas, and therefore how do we fund those new ideas. So it's quite a brave and sort of daring scheme. And I think it goes back to several points that have been brought out here about the lack of capital that is faced by most MSMEs. So I think, we have certainly schemes within government where the ability to provide MSMEs with money from government schemes. So there is the Atmanirbhar portal. Jan Samarth is what it's now being rebranded as, which will get launched very, very soon, where 15 different government schemes, including the ones, as mentioned by Mr. Somani, the CLSS certainly has stopped for the moment, but it's a great point. It came under discussion just a few days ago about, the utility of these schemes. SIDBI was, operating that scheme on behalf of the ministry. But the Jan Samarth portal would allow MSMEs to go and discover schemes which are directly applicable to them. Some of them could be interest subvention schemes if you're in a particular sector. It could be a variety of other schemes. And interestingly, again, to answer another point that got raised, is how are we bringing that end-to-end digital journey to happen? So, in fact, the Jan Samarth portal allows for an interaction between the MSMEs and the government schemes and the banks that would deliver the credit under that particular scheme, and underlying which we have the digital document execution, which is now growing within the country. So you have 20 states which have given digital stamping and therefore adding the digital signature on that. We're talking about the possibility of loans being given out on a much faster basis. So there are several schemes that are being worked out within the government. In fact, CGT-MSC was also a great point that was raised. And since SIDBI is operating that scheme, let me just quickly give you a few statistics. 1.2 lakh crore loans are already within the CGT-MSC scheme. And with an increase in corpus that was announced in the budget, we are certainly looking at an addition of 2 lakh crore loans onto the guarantee platform. So you're talking about, something reaching regions of about 3.3, 3.4 lakh crores. And certainly it can go up because it's proved to be a good scheme. What we've also done simultaneously is revamp the entire platform. So there were certainly complaints. It was an old platform, not that easy for banks to, upload their information and also to make claims. So in about 2 months' time, we should be rolling out an entirely new platform. And we've already started working with a few banks to get their feedback on the platform. So there are many schemes that are happening. In fact, on the startup scheme, I would say the seed capital is something that's already happening within a scheme which is run more from the Department of Science and Technology. But there's another seed capital scheme under DPIIT. There would now be another scheme with the MSME ministry coming out with its scheme. So, and apart from that, you'd be amazed that state governments have got so many schemes which MSMEs do not even know about. So another thing that's being worked on is to try and bring in a portal where, there would be a connect, just maybe an information connect between seekers of capital and a variety of investors and government schemes where capital already exists. So there are many things which are happening. In fact, what Mr. Sharma also mentioned, several points on which I think, responses would be seen coming through in the next few months, if I were to say, because even Trends has picked up enormously during this year. So I think we are all hoping that with the pandemic behind us, we will be seeing business going back to normal. So I can tell you on RXIL, the volumes have already jumped, and we are seeing that many more options being created. So today it's sort of driven by the buyer, but when sellers can also be viewed as buyers, and then you have smaller MSMEs coming along with those existing sellers, you're widening the entire scope. So there are many things happening, I would say, and probably it is more important to get more schemes and more traction in existing schemes. Both things need to happen. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Raman, I think I have received few questions, but the small challenge is most of the people have sent a long feedback, instead the questions. But there are, I think, one or more. So there is one question specifically about Atmanirbhar credit, and this is for Mr. Sharma. So Mr. Sharma, let me shoot this question to you. The question is, has the RBI applied any thought on developing Atmanirbhar credit rating norms or developing Atmanirbhar NPA norms? I'm so sorry. Can you please unmute yourself?
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mr. Sharma, this question is specifically for you. The participant wants to know whether RBI has applied any thoughts on developing Atmanirbhar credit rating norms.
Credit rating norms or NPA norms? I heard NPA norms somewhere. Credit rating norms are not with us. That part one. And insofar as NPA norms are concerned, NPA norms are the international, accepted norms of IRAC norms. I don't think it would be possible for us to modify that norms and relax them. If there is a proposal, I have not heard of it.
I think let me repeat. Maybe there is a voice cracking here. The question is about, since the government has launched Atmanirbhar projects and Atmanirbhar scheme, what the audience wants to know is, by any chance, RBI is also thinking offer some Atmanirbhar credit kind of policy or a project to the MSMEs, is what the question.
See, insofar as the credit is concerned, you will understand that whether it's in bank or an NBFC or a small finance bank or a universal bank, credit is a commercial decision of the bank or the NBFC. So, and there are some, regulatory dispensations which are available, but in terms of rating requirement, which is not under RBI, or in terms of the IRAC norms, NPA norms, which are commonly known as the NPA norms, these are the international best practices, and our endeavor in RBI is to move the country towards the international best practices. Giving these forbearances for a limited period for a particular sector creates a lot of moral hazard. which we have seen. The result was the high increase in the NPAs in the 2013, 14, 15, 16. So these forbearances do not serve the sector to that extent as we intend that it should serve. Secondly, most of these forbearances, based on our experience of having granted such forbearances in future, they perpetuate themselves. They benefit those segments which actually do not need them, and the real beneficiaries invariably, get filtered out of such, dispensations. So at the moment, we are not looking at any such Atmanirbhar NPA norms.
Sure. Thank you for that note, Mr. Sharma, and the clarification. I have a couple of more, feedback here, but unfortunately, the time is up. The watch is already started ticking. I think, it's already 11:30 now, and I have to stop here. But thank you so much, gentlemen. It was a great learning for me, and I'm sure for the audience as well. And that also, tells me that we should do more such talks specifically on the MSME segment, which we'll try to do and try to reach out to you, gentlemen. So thank you so much, Mr. Sharma, for remarkable insights. Thank you so much, Mr. Agrawal. Thank you so much, Mr. Iyer. Thank you so much, Mr. Somani. And thank you so much, Mr. Raman, for the meaningful insights here on this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
sincerely thank all the esteemed panelists for such an interesting and insightful discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our second session now. The cutting edge and world-class digital infrastructure in India, including the India Stack, UIDAI, GST-in, UPI, OCIN, Account Aggregator Framework, etc., have enabled startups to leverage them to solve many citizen-scale pain points and build strong business models. The next session on Digitech at 75 for startups will discuss the present, new, and emerging trends of Digitech ecosystem in India and globally, which Indian startup ecosystem needs to be aware of to prepare for the coming years. For the panel today, we are fortunate and grateful to have best of the industry minds today. We all look forward to listening to their views. I would like to welcome Mr. Sudatta Mandal, Deputy Managing Director, SIDBI, to moderate the discussion. A very warm welcome, Mr. Mandal. And let me also introduce our panel of speakers. Mr. Saurabh Garg, Chief Executive Officer, Unique Identification Authority of India. Mr. Sharad Sharma, Co-founder, iSpirit Foundation. Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder of InfoEdge India Limited. Mr. Karthik Reddy, co-founder and managing partner, Bloom Venture and vice chairman of Indian Venture Capital Association. And Ms. Padmaja Ruparel, co-founder and president of Indian Angel Network. A very warm welcome to all the panelists. And now I will hand over the moderation part to Mr. Mandal.
Welcome to the panel on Digitech at 75 for startups. Ever since the last decade, startup businesses have been flourishing unabatedly, with the past 5 years alone being more important, with a large number of startups coming up in our country. The Government of India's thrust for creating an enabling environment for startup businesses in India by setting up a fund of funds with a corpus of rupees 10,000 crore through the Startup India Action Plan, which was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister on 16th of January 2016, is indeed a booster for the startup ecosystem. In 2021 alone, the country saw around 45 unicorns, taking the total number of unicorns to 90. In 2021, Indian startups raised a total of more than $40 billion, as against around $11 billion in 2020. Today, India is home to the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, with around 60,000 startups. The Indian unicorns are flourishing in this fast-paced and dynamic economy. Besides developing innovative solutions and technologies, these startups provide large-scale employment as well. It is a matter of pride that today, 1 out of 13 unicorns globally is born in India, and we will soon see decacorns too in our country. It is also heartening to see that a large number of startups have matured well enough to launch their IPOs recently. So, from a technology perspective, the rapid transformation happening across sectors makes us believe that whatever advancements that have happened over the last 25 years were just the beginning, and more innovative ways of doing businesses are shaping up. Artificial intelligence and data analytics are disrupting every sphere of life, be it spending, saving, work environment, healthcare, entertainment, shopping, traveling, etc. These developments, therefore, offer tremendous opportunity for the startup ecosystem to gain further traction in the years to come and contribute to the national economy on a large scale. The growth story of startups in the country has only been possible because of the inherent entrepreneurial talent pool in the country. Therefore, going forward, it is of paramount importance to identify, encourage, and nurture the talent in this space, along with creating a more conducive environment for them to thrive and grow. So, to discuss on this very important topic of the present and emerging trends of digitech ecosystem in the country and around the world, we have a panel of eminent personalities with wide and varied experience in the startup ecosystem. I have the pleasure of introducing the panelists who really don't need any introduction and are well-known experts in their respective fields. We have with us today Dr. Saurabh Garg, CEO of Unique Identification Authority of India, or UIDAI. Mr. Sharat Sharma, co-founder iSquare Foundation, that is Indian Software Products Industry Roundtable, a non-profit technology think tank devoted to making India a product nation. Mr. Sanjeev Bikhchandani, founder of InfoEdge India Limited, better known as Naukri.com, one of the early internet companies founded in the late 1990s, engaged in online classifieds business, especially recruitment, matrimony, real estate, education, and related services. Mr. Karthik Reddy, Vice Chairman of the Indian Venture and Alternate Capital Association, or IVCA, the oldest organization representing venture capital and private equity firms. And of course, last and definitely not the least, Ms. Padmaja Rupare, founding partner of the Indian Angel Network, which is one of the largest investor networks in India, and co-founder of many institutions, as well as an angel investor herself. A warm welcome to the panel members, and thank you for agreeing to share your experience and thoughts on the subject with us today. I will begin with you, Dr. Garg. India has shown its readiness in digital innovations by building world-class infrastructure such as India Stack, UIDAI, GSTIN, UPI, OCIN, account aggregator framework, etc., for the benefit of its economy and its business ecosystem, especially the startups, to leverage local and global business avenues. What are your initial remarks on the Digitech at 75 for startups, the public digital infrastructure in India? Secondly, digitization being the buzzword going around, which has seen a huge transition to DigiSpace by majority of the businesses. How does the future story look on this? And which are the next innovations coming out of UIDAI? You have been a path breaker, so what more can we see from UIDAI?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mandal, and thank you to SIDBI and ET for inviting me to the summit. I think the digital public infrastructure in the country is something which has been given the highest importance over the past a decade or more. And with the launch of the Digital India mission, that has got a more focused approach on this. The last 5 to 7 years have really seen an extension of the digital and the digitization across sectors. Aadhaar was perhaps the first of these public infrastructures, which now covers 99.8% of the adult population. So anyone above the age of 18 who is living in India has an Aadhaar card. And even within the 0 to 18 age group, within a short time, by the time any child is 18, the children have their Aadhaar. And this really has opened out a number of opportunities across various sectors. Of course, the government has been making use of this extensively with the development of the Aadhaar payments bridge, which has enabled transfers to happen from the government directly into the bank accounts of people through the direct benefits transfer mechanism, but also for the people to be able to withdraw and do banking services using the Aadhaar-enabled payment systems, the AEPS, and the network of more than 30 to 35 lakh active banking correspondents which exist across the country. So this is just one of them. You mentioned about the India Stack, the UPI, the e-sign services, and a host of services which are available on the mobile, things like DigiLocker and all those which are built around improving digitization and increasing the digital economy. In fact, the target is to have a 1 trillion digital economy alone going forward. And that is something which no doubt provides a lot of opportunities for startups. One other area which you mentioned, the Open Credit Enabled Network, the OCEN, which obviously, and given the fact that large number of MSMEs are proprietor concerns, that provides a lot of leeway and possibility of leveraging the Aadhaar to ensure that these single owned or proprietor concerns can piggyback on the Aadhaar ecosystem to be able to ensure that the credit enablement is done for these kind of organizations. And that is something that is being worked upon. There is also the ONDC, which is looking at building a more common framework for the e-commerce. You have the account aggregator model, which has been recently started by the RBI. You have the NDR framework, which is looking at how scholarships and students can be helped. And then you, of course, have the Ayushman system that is being built up, the Ayushman ID, which the health authority is building up, also to look at how digitization can help the health sector. So I think digitization, individual efforts are being made in each of these sectors by the government in conjunction with the private sector. And these are the kind of areas where the work will continue and will provide a lot of opportunities for continued digitization. Within Aadhaar, we just had a workshop to look at Aadhaar 2.0. Given that 1 decade of Aadhaar is behind us, what is it that the next decade will presage? And our vision of Aadhaar 2.0 is to ensure how we can help in improving the ease of living of residents in the country. We would like Aadhaar, which is now available with every resident of the country, provides a digital mechanism to reach that person, how it can help in the ease of living, and looking at what other services can utilize the Aadhaar ecosystem, which is a public infrastructure. So we are looking at how we can reduce the cost, both financial and technical costs. What kind of frictions are there in the system so that the pipeline becomes much more streamlined, and what other mechanisms are needed legally or otherwise to ensure that that an agency who wishes to use Aadhaar within the overall privacy framework, within the consent framework, which has been set out by the Supreme Court, which has been built into the Aadhaar Act, and which will further get institutionalized once the Data Privacy Bill becomes an act. Given this framework that exists, what can be done to ensure better leverage by various agencies, including the private sector, to help in our objectives of ease of living? And we've, to that extent, we recently brought out the offline verification systems regulation, which will help MSMEs or anyone utilize Aadhaar, utilize the QR code, utilize the machine read files, which can help to identify. And given that KYC is essential for any business, that is what we want to enable and ensure that the public infrastructure, which is unparalleled in the world, which no other country has it, can be better utilized for for focusing on improving the lives of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good remarks from you. In fact, UIDAI has actually been a trailblazer, and we from SIDBI we intend to make the Udyam registration as the Aadhaar equivalent for the MSMEs. So we are at a fairly advanced stage of discussions with the Ministry of MSME for onboarding the 6.5 crore MSMEs in the country onto the Udyam portal, and also doing their KYC through an assisted mode and putting it up on the central KYC registry, so that that can become the one single point KYC done for all these MSMEs, and they are credit ready. And whenever they approach anybody in the lending system, they can simply download the KYC done and upload it on the CKYC instead of doing it individually. So my next question to you would be that with the digital infrastructure in place, the public digital infrastructure in place, and we have quite a few of them as we have been discussing, what do you think are India's expectations from these startups? Your thoughts or inputs on the readiness of the industry in adoption of digitization or technology in its businesses?
In fact, I'm presently speaking from Bangalore, and we had a wonderful session with many startups yesterday in conjunction with the Reserve Bank Innovation Hub. And we were looking at how the financial sector startups are using Aadhaar and the infrastructure that is available, and what further their expectations are from Aadhaar in order to be able to use it more effectively. And it was heartening to see that the KYC is a bedrock for any financial system company to be able to move forward. And most of them were using Aadhaar. Obviously, there were wrinkles which needed to be removed, and very good suggestions were given on how those wrinkles can be removed in terms of how Aadhaar can be accessed and how the number of hops that one has to do, how they can be reduced. So what we would like any startup which needs the KYC as an initial basis for onboarding any customer, onboarding any client, how that onboarding can be made more streamlined. We already have a number of services. We have an encrypted QR code which anyone can read through a mobile QR code reader. We have, as I mentioned, the machine language files which can be downloaded, of course, and through authorized systems, one can ping on our CI and on our data base and also get the KYC done. But what other mechanisms are needed? We are working with them, and we'll continue to work with them, and we look forward to suggestions from the startups, and would be very happy if you can also help us get some suggestions on how they are using and what kind of improvements they need. But essentially what the Aadhaar ecosystem offers is a mechanism to confirm whether the person, whom that person claims, whether they are actually that, and it gives basic data of that person in terms of the address and the name and the date of birth, etc., which becomes the initial basis for any industry, any startup to do. And this comes at a very, very low cost. And I think that's where the value of Aadhaar comes in. Otherwise, a paper-based mechanism or any other mechanism might cost a few hundreds of rupees, and this can be done at a fraction of cost in a few rupees or even less.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. I'll now move on to you, Sharad. You are an evangelist of the software product ecosystem in India. How is India's future-ready technology infrastructure complementing the startup ecosystem and its entrepreneurial spirit?
Yeah, so if you go back to maybe 15 years ago or so, with a few exceptions like Sanjeev in Naukri, Bharat Matrimony, most of the startups in India were attempting to be global startups, based out of India, solving problems outside India. Now, the big shift that has taken place is that the new generation of startups are keen to solve problems in Bharat, in what you would call as India 2 and India 3. And that has become possible simply because of the public digital infrastructure that Dr. Garg talked about that has become available. And without that, we won't be seeing that. And COVID has been a very good example. We've been able to, because of the plumbing that has been changed, which is how people move through the health system, how money moves through the health system, and how information moves through the health system. We've been able to vaccinate, on a single day, but certainly in a single week, 25 million people. Something that we used to do in a year. Our 31,000 vaccination centers would otherwise vaccinate the 25 million children that were born in a year. And so there has been a sea change in our ability to do things in Bharat. You've seen Zerodha become very successful and the deepening of the equity culture. You've seen all the fintechs being able to do things that were not possible. I would venture to say that Jio would not have become Jio if they did not do 160 million KYCs using the system that Dr. Garg has provided in 160 days, right? So this is a radical new innovation model. And I think we have to wrap around this Jugalbandi model, which is a Jugalbandi between digital public infrastructure. And India has the best digital public infrastructure in the world right now, and private innovation. For Bharat, we have to also understand some meta shifts that are taking place. So, for example, Jio became Jio because they exploited the shift from voice to data. So we have to ask in this SIDBI conference, what is that equivalent shift that is taking place for fintechs? And that equivalent shift is going from physical collateral to informational collateral. And as Bank of International Settlement says, India is further along in this than any other country in the world. Why? Because not only can we offer low friction for giving a loan for a short tenure, short amount loan, because the cost is so low, we can rotate that loan. We can also bring information asymmetry down because of the account aggregator system that RBI has launched on 2nd September that Dr. Garg referred to. And I must say that's growing very rapidly. It is growing at the same pace that Aadhaar was growing in its early days. It's been growing at 28% week on week. Week on week growth is 28% from September 2nd. And soon we will have the remaining piece of this that will fall in place, which RBI has publicly announced it's building, and it's called the Public Credit Registry. So there is this coordinated approach for this shift from physical collateral to informational collateral that is coming, where private innovators are working hand in glove with digital public infrastructure. Both are happening at the same time. And this is a magic that used to happen only in Silicon Valley in the past. So, if you ask, and we had this opportunity because one of our iSpirit volunteers, Lalitesh Katragada, that some of you know, his company, Sefero, was the first company that Google acquired in its history. So once we were having this discussion with the Google founders, and we were asking them, what made you latch on to UPI so quickly? And this was their definition of Google. This is not me describing Google. This is the Google founders describing Google. They said, what is Google? Google is public infrastructure for email called SMTP. Private innovation on top of that is Gmail. It is public infrastructure for website, which is HTTP. Their innovation on top of that, which is search. Public infrastructure called GPS. Their innovation on top of that is maps. So when UPI came as a public protocol for payments, they said, they needed to examine and see if they could make it work. And it so happened that it accounted for 80% of their Google Pay, transactions before they knew it. Now, this is ironically, this Jugalbandi between public infrastructure and private innovation is embedded in Silicon Valley thinking, but was somewhat new in the Indian context. But I think because of the work that has happened with Aadhaar, with other public digital infrastructure, and the wonderful work that our fintechs have done, this is becoming a realistic model for India. And I think it is going to come in health. It is going to come in drones with digital sky. It is going to come in maps with this new policy and digital public infrastructure, private innovation in India. For all you know, 10 years from now, maybe a leader in next generation maps. It is definitely going to have health because of ABDM, UHI is going to happen in logistics. So India, as Balaji Srinivasan, certainly one of the major Silicon Valley advocates, mentioned after the budget. And he said that, look, if you contrast the infrastructure bill of the US and the budget of India, you can see which country is going to be in the upswing 5 or 10 years from now. This is his tweet. He says, in the infrastructure bill, the only thing that you can think of which is futuristic is EV charging stations. The Indian budget has words like public infrastructure, APIs, and lists down specific coordinated initiatives that we are talking about. So I think we are going to see a new era of entrepreneurship, innovation in India around this Jugalbandi innovation model. And therefore, from this, we will see companies that will emerge. And as our Jugalbandi innovation models, UPI is going to places. Dr. Garg has been instrumental in getting our identity system to go to other countries. As this travels, certainly our account aggregator system is going to other places. As that travels to other countries, you will see our startups also become global companies. Much the same way as GSM, which started in Scandinavia, as that became global, Nokia became global, Ericsson became global, and those companies became global. So it is usually when you go global, it is the infrastructure, product companies that travel and become global. So I am cautiously optimistic about the next 10 years. And it's been a very, very collective effort. And it wouldn't have happened, but, for our progressive, VCs and investors. So we will hear from them as we go forward. So this is, I think, a new era that is emerging as we go forward.
Great. Thanks. So just as a follow-up from what you said, we have seen an explosion of fintech startups in the country. What are the emerging trends that they need to understand, which could be disruptive?
So I'm going to share something which, was not in the public domain. But Inc.42 put an article out and it's already in the public domain. So I can share this with you. I want to say one of the most powerful mafias in the world is the Chicago economist, right? The macroeconomist. So I will tell you a story. Sometime back in 2019, a very Chicago economist, very well regarded, his name is Augustine Karsten. He is often on the Financial Times list of potential Nobel Prize winners. And many people believe he will win a Nobel Prize sometime in the future. He was appointed as the general manager, the head chairman of Bank of International Settlements. Bank of International Settlements is the central bank to central banks, as many of you know. And he came into this position because he was a very successful finance minister of Mexico. And he became a successful finance minister of Mexico because he was a very successful central banker of Mexico. And once he became that, he decided to visit India. And his Chicago colleagues, and I won't mention their names, but you can guess who they are, said that if you're going there, you must make sure you want to go to Bangalore first. And RBI was very helpful. And they said, yes, out of your 3-day program, you must at least spend the first day in Bangalore. He came in Bangalore. And because he came from a developing country, he was able to see the financial architecture that Dr. Garg described and see value in it. It's very easy for a developing country leader to see this rather than a developed country leader to see this. And he became a convert. This was in July 2019. Bank of International Settlement has several meetings that bring everybody together. On September 9th, he hosted a single agenda meeting in Basel, which is, I'm told, a single agenda meeting that happened after 16 years. For 16 years, there had never been a single agenda meeting that was hosted in Basel, where the Indian model was discussed by our governor, and several people from iSpirit, of course, traveled for that. And on December 15th, they released a paper which is there for everybody to consume, which says that which is the financial architecture for the world that they recommend, which is the Indian financial architecture for the world. Now, it is then we started seeing more religion amongst our fintechs, because unfortunately, we in India sometimes need the white man to tell us we are doing the right thing. And that started happening. And that is when a year later, you started seeing Western articles, before they started happening in India, that perhaps India will be the fintech capital of the world. So there is something that is happening in India that we sometimes don't appreciate, because we are in the middle of it. As they say, it's very hard to read the label of the bottle from the inside. And so sometimes you need an outside-in perspective. And that has been provided by Dr. Augustine Carsten, by BIS, and even ID4D, where UIDI is their champion kind of implementation in World Bank. And so you began to see a new class of money coming in for investment, a new class of entrepreneurs coming in. And so therefore, that is how it has started building. So clearly, the leader of this revolution of saying, can we build companies for the Bharat market, which are the most valuable companies in our ecosystem? That leader of that has been Naukri, Bharat Matrimony in the first generation. Jio, if you call them, they're not a startup anymore, but they were in the second generation. Fintech in the third generation. And I think it will be health, mapping, logistics in the fourth generation. So that is the story that will evolve. And I think we'll gradually move from catering to only 30 million Indian families, 120 million middle-class Indians, to actually catering to the 150 million families of Bharat, and solving their problems and creating value for them and for the country by using this Jugalbandi innovation model that we just discussed a little bit.
Thank you, Sharad, for those insightful views. I will now move on to Sanjeev. Sanjeev, what has been your entrepreneurial experience in the last 2 decades? What do you see as the main reasons for failure of some of the startups, and what are the key traits that the founders need to master to become successful entrepreneurs? Because it is not enough to have an idea. It is also equally important to be a professional and a true professional entrepreneur for your startup to succeed in the long run. So what would be your views on that?
Okay, so that's a very broad question, and I can talk for 3 hours on that without even coming to the point. But first of all, I want to thank Sharad for giving me one line in what he said, which I will shamelessly plagiarize. Of course, I will acknowledge his contribution. To मेरे पैसे वसूल हो गए Sharad, listening to you from this conversation. It's very hard to read the label of the bottle from inside. This I will shamelessly plagiarize. But anyway, coming to what you asked, see, there are 100 reasons why a startup can fail, right? Product market fit nahi hua, the customer didn't want the product, you were, aping a model from the West without seeing whether the Indian consumer wanted it. Perhaps you were unable to raise enough capital, perhaps there was competition, perhaps you were not building IP, whatever. But there's only one reason why startups succeed. And that is because if the founders are up to it and they can make it happen, a startup will succeed. And if they can do the right things, and execute well, and think through the right strategy, it's all in early stages. A lot of it depends on the founder, right? But I will like to add, something there, and it's not related to the question you asked, but I want to just build on what Sharad was saying. You see, what the government has done, what UIDI has done, it has created enough enabling a sort of platforms architecture for startups then to go out and build specific solutions for specific problems, right? And so, for example, I'll tell you,
we have done a number of investments into startups which are actually solving problems for India. So one example, we recently invested in a company called DigiVriddhi. Now, what does DigiVriddhi do? So payments is a pretty complex landscape which I didn't fully comprehend. I still don't, right? But we met this startup. It was solving a specific use case for a specific problem for a specific set of customers, where we believed they could build a fortress or a moat, right? So what happened post demonetization was the government instituted a slew of measures to encourage digital payments instead of cash. And one of those involved that cash transactions above a certain amount every year will attract a tax payment. Now, if you look at dairy farming, right, and how milk is sold in rural areas to procurement companies, cooperatives, bought by, let's say, Amul in Gujarat, right, and cash payments made to dairy farmers, in aggregate, they would exceed that limit and there would be a tax liability. That would make the activity, it would change the whole economics. Now, what it meant was that Amul said, we will credit your bank account. The nearest bank may have been 25, 30 kilometers away, and it became an expedition. It became an expedition for the farmer to go once a week, once in 2 weeks, and that impacted his daily cash flows and his working capital, right? And these are small farmers, 1 cow, 2 cows, 5 cows, 10 cows, large number of them. And what this company was doing, there was no great IP, there was no rocket science, it was system integration. It focused on a group of farmers in one cooperative, in one district, and said, let us try and solve your problem. So it did a tie-up with Amul and did a pilot and said, look, we can give you the money at the local milk collection point by simply, your bank is credited, from there it comes here, this guy's got the cash, he gives it to you, right? And this does not involve that. So you're withdrawing from your own bank account, therefore. Now, there are plenty of people doing solutions like this. But this one was focused and targeted on one group of people facing a pain, right? And its adoption has been tremendous. So without UPI, without Aadhaar, right? Without the local entrepreneur who runs the collection center, without him cooperating, this would not have been possible. And now it is scaling up rapidly because it's solving a very specific problem. So, and it's on the foundation of UPI, foundation of Aadhaar, that this has been done. So there'll be many, many, many specific opportunities for entrepreneurs to do stuff like this, right? And there are many companies which we have seen and some of them invested behind, which are actually solving local problems for small town India, for the small entrepreneur. For example, we have invested in a company called Shop Kirana. Shop Kirana services is out of Indore. Now, Indore is not a likely place to find a startup you would invest behind. It wasn't 5 years ago. It is now. We have invested in 2 companies out of Indore. We've invested in 1 company out of Kota. So entrepreneurship is coming out every year with local solutions. Medcourt is focusing on rural healthcare. Shop Kirana is focusing on serving the small retailer, the local, very small Kirana store, and making it more competitive against organized retail, against e-commerce. Counterintuitive, because it is said that e-commerce will take over the world. Organized retail will kill the small guy. But here's the company that is actually empowering the small retailer. Very, very Bharat solution. Right? So there are several companies, and these are entrepreneurs who are coming out and building on what the government has done to create solutions relevant for India. So many, many things are happening, actually. Sorry, I'll stop here. I could go on.
Great. No, thank you. In the earlier panel today morning, Mr. Somani suggested setting up a fund for technology adoption by the MSMEs. What would be your views on the cost of adoption of technology or digitization by the startups, considering that they have scarce resources, at least at the initial stages when they are still startups? And also, could availability of tech talent become an issue going forward?
no, available tech talent is already an issue. However, and you see, augmentation of capacity in tech talent is a slow process. First, he enrolls in engineering college, then he does 4 years, and then he graduates, and then he works for a few years. So it's a 6-7 year thing. And we have seen in the last 10 years, a large number of engineering colleges have either downscaled or shut down. We also have seen that if India has X thousand engineering colleges, maybe the 60% of the engineers are not great. You need to improve capacity and you want to improve quality, right? So it's hard, and which is why you're seeing the kind of wage inflation for tech talent. Now, as far as doing funds for SMEs to get them to adopt technology, I think raising of capital that expects a financial return, right, comes with onerous responsibilities, which means that whatever you want to do has to be fundable. You have to be able to return the capital. You have to give an exit at a certain rate of return, which the investor expects. Now, if you are getting capital which expects a lower rate of return or does not expect a return, then your pool of available capital becomes that much smaller. And we may criticize capital that expects a high rate of return, but actually that makes a very efficient allocation of capital. Okay, and so we mustn't sort of diss it without fully comprehending the good things that this capital does. And when that capital gets a return, it plows the return back, and that's how growth happens. So the amount, I think, Karthik and Padmanath will be able to educate us here as to how much venture capital and PE capital came into the Indian startup ecosystem last year. It was several $1 billion. Now, this amount of capital did not come in if they did not see a prospect of a return. So SME fund, yes, but it's not charity.
Correct.
Therefore, the project has got to be fundable. The proposal has got to be fundable. The capital should come back. Otherwise, you'll be left with a very small pool of capital for this activity. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Sanjeev. I'll move on to Karthik now. How significant is our digital ecosystem and its readiness to promote the industry within India and abroad? And as a member of IBCA, do you have any specific policy suggestions concerning the Digitech startups?
So we have a long list. So obviously, it was recognized in the budget after a lot of, activism by the industry over the full decade. Folks like Padmaja, even Sanjeev, Sharad, etc., doing their bit. Yes, the idea, Mr. Mandal, is to try and get more domestic capital to participate in this journey as well, right? So far, we feel the bulk of the capital or the investment has been made by the government, the telco players, to their credit, Jio. We do use the post-Jio world as a phrase in the venture world. So they did have a big role in reshaping those costs of infrastructure coming down. And foreign capital, right? So to Sanjeev's point, close to $40 billion of PEVC money. So alternative capital is driving more FDI than net inflows on public markets. And if you're thinking of long-term sort of orientation of how this country should grow, stock markets are a great indicator, but that's not the way you're going to build the infrastructure and the path to $5 trillion economies, right? So that's a play on what is already built out. What does need to get built out is going to be provided and fueled by private equity venture capital. So easing up, and so we have one of the fundamental tenets that we use to try and explain this to all our friends in North Block and the government is basically say that, like you have reduced friction of capital to come in and out of somebody's bank account using a UPI, you have to do that for institutional capital. You can't create 18 different blocks and paperwork for X rupees to come into a company to be able to, where both parties are willing. I'm willing to take the risk, the entrepreneur is willing to build, but we have 18 blockages or 20 blockages for the capital to come. And even more importantly, to take from Sanjeev's point, if this capital doesn't go back, then the cycle gets jammed, right? You got to unleash the flywheel. You have to see the velocity of that capital going back. So everything, whether it's M&As, whether it's public listings, whether it is alternative exchanges that you can put up, the equivalent of creating the ability to do SPACs. So there's a lot of innovation left to in financial markets on the structuring side, right? So people to people, my Ambala gets money from me in 3 seconds, right? So, but when it comes to institutions to institutions, we have 20 checkpoints. So yes, there has to be capabilities to diminish fraud and have all the mechanisms of identification and KYC. This Udyan thing that you said is fascinating. I've been theoretically arguing that startups should have their own UID equivalent, right? So we're accountable by one identified number, and so then that makes the benefits that we get as an industry far more easy to sort of transact. You don't have to go through 18 different checkpoints every time you go for every discussion with both private and public entities. So broadly, I feel like we need to take some of the innovation that we put in digital infrastructure and bring it to capital markets as well, right? And have more fluidity of capital. That's the overarching suggestion. Of course, we have the ingredients to take on what the entrepreneurial energy and the infrastructure elements that were eloquently described by all the panelists before me, and to grow them, but to become far more innovative on that front. We don't need to look outward and try to say what happens in that market. We can be innovative on that front as well. So first principles thinking on how to increase velocity of capital coming back to fuel innovation, I think is the key to get into a $5 trillion economy. The center of it is sitting private equity and venture capital. It's not going to happen by public market investors, with no disrespect to them. They're after the party is finished, right? So somebody has to create that whole journey, and that's going to come from our sources of capital. So that's my sort of quick take. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'm happy to double click on anything you need.
Sure. We were talking about the adequacy or the better public digital infrastructure that we have in the country today, which is being now emulated or proposed to be emulated by the other countries, and we are leading in that. Do you think that in terms of the startup ecosystem arising from the digital innovations that have been happening, do you think India will have an edge over the other nations going forward in terms of the individual the digitization or the digital technologies being developed by the startup ecosystem?
Partly for the reasons Sharad mentioned, partly for the reasons Sanjeev mentioned. So if you have, it's basically infrastructure at a cost that nobody else is able to deliver in the world, right? So the cost component becomes very important because you're able to innovate for a similar problem being solved by an equally enterprising set of founders in a different part of the world, but at a much lower cost, arguably, right? And I think that allows us to leverage what IT services was, the negative connotation around our IT exports it's just a human labor arbitrage, right? I think that changes to the ability to innovate thanks to both public infrastructure and just the quality of products coming out of India. And it's a cycle, by the way. Silicon Valley wasn't built in a day. It started with semiconductors and chips, but it took 7 generations of cycling of ideas and literally components, devices, Web 1, Web 2, Web 3 to get to where it has today. I think we're very early in that journey. 15 years in total has been the sort of venture-funded startup journey in the country. And what you're seeing today is the first iteration of what Sanjeev seeded in his own journey, then built the next set of unicorns from his early investments. And then we are coming to a point where it's become widespread, right? So now think of two elements that are happening. So much like it happened with IT service companies or Indians sitting at the helms of global companies, there is an acknowledgement that we have great entrepreneurial talent and leadership talent that's already been there in the world. Now you're empowering an Indian company, which was sitting at $500 million valuation 3 years ago, and basically capitalizing them to $6-7 billion because you think they have the opportunity, like Sharad said, to go win over other markets. Right? You're not limited by the boundaries of India at one level. So infrastructure companies, SaaS, deep tech, any value-added layers around products, we can theoretically go and win a far more significant share of the market, as we did with IT services. Yes, you can call IBM a US company, but you can also call it an Indian company. The biggest workforce is in India, right? And so we're going to see that phenomena. And human capital we've always had the demographic dividend advantage. Some of it was thrown into, the engineering college, English learning, flywheels to be able to generate the masses. But now if we can again leverage digital infrastructure to train faster, the reason the quality sucked is because you can't transmit high quality education face to face in every corner of the country. But digital then just changes those dynamics altogether. So, which is why tech is flying off the charts, and there's a lot more work to be done, by the way. And I feel you have to go all the way to primary education to fix that. It's a 15-year journey. You can't suddenly take someone who's in 10th grade, hasn't had great education, and then make them a world-class sort of professional overnight. But that cycle has also begun, and I'm very hopeful that the combination of the two, the fact that we know how to go build on a global stage, we take those playbooks. So that now the first poster children, whether it's Girish at Freshworks, those poster children then come and become inspiration for the next generation to go say, I can build, why a $10 billion company? I can build a $100 billion company out of India. And then the labor that allows for that is just, become dispersed. I don't have to depend only on Indian labor. We can also go and get Eastern European and Southeast Asian, labor where we require it, talent rather, and be able to leverage all of that to build world-class companies out of here. And the reason the friction points need to go is you don't want the companies to then be seen as Indians building American companies. Indians can build in India and build a $100 billion company. The IT services companies have shown us that. But that velocity that the venture ecosystem requires needs to be adhered to. It's great that you're building them over 30 years, but we want them built in 8. So if you put blockades on that, then it becomes a very unattractive destination to build. Then the Indian will go emigrate into the US or the UK, build the best fintech company or the SaaS company there, and hire in India. Right? And that's exactly what we should avoid from the venture industry perspective. As a homegrown fund, obviously my selfish motivation is to see all of this actually happen in India. We list in India, we eventually go take these companies public in India, everything stays in India.
Great, thanks. So a very quick question, but on a different vein. Which has been your most successful digitech investment so far?
The one we're proud of most are the deep tech companies which have not yet become unicorns, but when both become, we hope they'll be marked as the first of the deep tech unicorns. Grey Orange and Carbon Clean, right? One's in the US, one's in the UK. 10 years, both, there's unique characteristics. There's no other Indian on the cap table. Nobody believed that these things could be built out of India. Therefore, it took 10 years by the time you exported them and got them foreign capital. And then both were actually college kids who've never worked a day in their life for anybody else. So both were college startups. So there are trend lines in those which are very, very appealing, right? I mean, it's a great story. If those two can become world-beating companies and they can actually become one of the biggest warehouse automation companies in the world in the case of Grey Orange, or actually help, they play their role in saving the planet and do most carbon capture on the planet out of UK and Europe. But they're differentiated in that sense. So if, everything else, there will be a comparable in somebody else's portfolio. These are kind of unique, something we're very proud of.
So just taking from what you said, that these were startups out of colleges, they didn't have a single days of work experience. Any suggestions for improvement in the overall mechanism or process of incubation in India?
Yes, these came out of BITS Pilani and Kharagpur, but I think the angel networks do a great job of actually pulling them out of there and being the alums have to start helping more. And I don't think it's about simply throwing an incubator at the problem. Because the incubators also, if not aided by alumni support in terms of mentoring, taking them up. And not as much in the Kharagpur one, but in the BITS Pilani one, the alum network helped a lot in guiding and mentoring these kids. As much as Bloom can take credit, you need that kind of parental guidance, right? And that naturally flows in some of these. early stage deep tech kind of companies, because that whiz kid who's building something interesting in college has a shot at this, moonshot at this, but it requires a lot of guidance to convert them to a world-class CEO, which is also why it explains it took 9-10 years to get to where it is. So one sitting on the verge of becoming a unicorn, the other is just closing around this week or next week at 650 million. So that scaling was going to take very long, wherever you threw it. So we don't have people networks which sit on top of the incubators, I would argue, on a systematic basis. And then you have one or two examples, but I think you need to be able to emulate the best practices in 5-6 places first, solve for them before starting 100 others. This idea of saying, chalo 100 aur karte, let every state do this, I feel it's like wild cowboyism, right? To what end? Like to Sanjeev's point, eventually you want only success begets success. So you build a successful model, then replicate it. Without seeing that, to go and blindly say that every state, every college, every IIT should do it is just a whimsical thought in my view.
So in that effort, will a structured course on entrepreneurship development help, really, do you think?
Stuff, I think, again, BITS, I think, has more of an entrepreneurial talent. My co-founders from there, I'm from Roorkee, because they force like a 6 to 9 month internship as a part of the curriculum, right? I don't think courses help, sir. I mean, I think only ability to dive in. I mean, I have 2 MBAs. I'm guilty of like 2. And I still tell kids now that if you want to be in startups, you shouldn't have any MBA. Your startup is your MBA, right? How you break in desperately there. It's tougher to get into a world-class startup and work in the founder's office than to get into an IIM today, right? So if you actually crack that, your training is probably going to be 5 times better than making it to that, right? So you should try and aspire to that after a year or 2 of work, rather than try to jump back into an MBA. If you want to work in that space and become what you are suggesting, an entrepreneurship or an entrepreneurial leader, there's no point in teaching that in the curriculum to a person who's never worked a day in his life in the 3rd year. You can set frameworks, of course, but I feel like forcing more training. We used to do industrial training in factories. I did in Ashok Leyland at KCP in engineering, right, 25 years ago. That should be converted to get into a digital startup and work in the founder's office. And you should encourage that internship program to be pushed by all the IITs, right? I don't think there's anything systematic. It's happening with some private interventions and stuff, but I don't think there's systematic stuff. That's what we should encourage.
Great. Thanks. I'll now finally move on to Padmaja. Padmaja, you are a businesswoman and a key player in the Indian entrepreneurial system. How do you see the journey of India's digital innovation, especially creating a future-ready ecosystem? And what are the hottest digitech trends that you see from the startups that approach you?
Thanks, Sudhata. Thanks for this opportunity, and thank you to SIDBI and ET as well for inviting me. I think a lot has been covered in the by my earlier panelists, but I think we are really sitting at the cusp of something which can morph India. If you look at the entire digital effort that has gone through, which I think Sharad and Sanjeev sort of alluded to, and so did Dr. Garg, I think we are set to become $1 trillion digital economy by 2025. And I think to do that in the kind of time period that we're looking at, just 3 years down the line, we obviously have built a lot of building blocks to do that. It is a target. It is a $1 trillion value that can be created, which will completely morph a number of things, including the GDP. We will lead to cost savings, better employment, increased output. So this is very seminal in some ways. The second thing that it is doing, it is morphing also the traditional industry, and that is very important. While startups are sort of innovating and building Indian companies going global or Indian companies going into Bharat, I think there is a big change that is happening, which is being led by startups, by disruptive, innovative startups, which is changing a lot of the traditional industry. I mean, on the ground, right through the 2 years of the pandemic, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received by large corporates saying that we need to go digital very quickly. The tough lockdown that we went through was a big problem for many of them. And that, I think, is one of the biggest markers in some way where digital is going to transform the country going forward. And just as startups are here to stay, it's not something which is here today and not there tomorrow. And I've seen that also through so many years. But I think the digitization of Indian industry is now here to stay. I mean, think of the large associations, CII, FICCI. I think the focus that just the members from there have on startups is because they realize that we need to engage. 2.5 years ago, we were chasing industry to say, please work with our startups. Please see if they can be you can become customers to them. Today, it's the other way around. So I think these are all markers which are telling us that the digital transformation of this country is now on a path. And the only thing to stop this happening or slow down is we ourselves. If we don't build this together, and when I say we, whether it is industry, whether it is startups, whether it is investors, whether it's governments, I think all stakeholders today are there to build this up. And for that, we need various things. Again, Karthik referred to quite a few of them, but I think two things which are very important for any company to do well, startup or otherwise. Number one is funds. And today we are seeing a lot of domestic money opened up. We ourselves raised most of our funds from our VC fund in India. We've just had other funds be completely domestic money in their funds. So money is starting to open up. And I think SIDBI's fund of funds led the way in many ways. But I think the other big piece is talent. If you have funds and you don't have talent, it's not going to work, and the other way around, right? So I think that there is deep tech talent here. There is mentoring here. There's good academia here. But this needs to be scaled up dramatically. And to scale that up, it's not going to work just by a few institutions, academic institutions or universities getting into it. This has to be scaled up imaginatively, and that needs to be digitally transformed to create that kind of talent, to upgrade, quote unquote, talent. I know there are a number of initiatives that are happening, be it at be it at Niti Aayog or at NASSCOM, etc. But I think it needs to be completely driven bottoms up. I'll give you an example, and I'm taking digital transformation in a little bit wider term of technology innovation, right? I'll tell you a company which we've invested in called Pool. Okay, it is basically converting temple waste into products of personal care, etc. Now, what has changed? Two things. Number one, they've leveraged biotechnology and they've leveraged online digital sales completely on the ground, right? But more importantly, today as we stand, they have changed the lives of 4,000 people who were at the absolute bottom of the economic struggle. And if you go and meet them, there are people who were scavengers who are today working on computers, doing data entry and learning Excel. Lives have changed, right? They have become entrepreneurs. They have started small entrepreneurial enterprises in there. And I think this is what is important. Transforming lives. And that's the power of digital that I think is more important to me. It's somewhat a metaphor to say valuation versus value. I think this is life-changing. Digital transformation is great, but lives getting transformed, I think, is actually what really excites. And is really, it's the need of the hour. And if we can do it, we are a seventh of the world's population and size. If India can do it, there is no reason why the world won't be able to follow. And we have the ability to lead. We talked about SaaS products. We've talked about companies going global. We've talked about Indians leading global companies. I think we have an ability to lead in this sphere also of changing lives. And we have that opportunity also for a different reason. We are a very large country, right? What works in the north doesn't necessarily work in the south. right? So a North Indian will have very different consumer habits, and the South Indian will have very different, right? Purely geography, weather, etc., etc. So if something works in India, in one part of the country, it will surely work in another part of the world, right? If you look at companies like WebEngage, which is an online engagement and customer engagement retention platform built in India, it's not necessary to go to the US or North America. You can build it in other parts of the world. You can go to LATAM, there's the MENA regions, go to east of us, right? So I think the transformation that we are seeing in India, and Dr. Garg spoke about it, Sharad spoke about it, the UPI, the fintech, those are the layers that are being built to which needs to percolate down to the bottom layer. And there are companies like Pool, companies like Wooden Street, which have taken carpenters who are in the, in probably the remotest part of the country, and actually getting their products online and being sold in urban houses and urban offices. I think that's the transformation which digital is bringing to transform lives. So to me, I think business, yes, is important because you refer to businesswoman, but I think business with a heart and an ability to transform lives is what creates the value that we can actually build here, and I would say, quote unquote, export it.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you that the digital revolution should actually transform the lives of the people of this country. And we always talk about the startups going global, but given the size of the country, the population that we have, and also the diversity of the geographies of consumer behavior, as you rightly said, even startups who are hyper-local can thrive. And we also need startups at that level to improve the quality of life of the people at the bottom of the pyramid also. So, that all ties it together.
Yeah, and I think it's not only startups. I think we should probably think of SMEs also, because we just get caught up in this startup thing. I think SMEs have a much wider impact. And as Sanjeev said, it's very important for capital to have returns to investors, right? Because philanthropy money is good, but when the good money stops, the good work stops in some ways, right? So you don't want that happening. So you have to have money which is recycling.
Absolutely. Now, and just a final question to you: how do the angels or the angel networks enable the budding startups or entrepreneurs and foster the innovation-driven entrepreneurial culture in the country?
So let me take this. If you look at angel investing, there are two words, or angel investors, there are two words. One is angel, one is investors, right? So I think this class of money, which could be either angel investors, it is also, to my mind, early stage VC funds. They take the similar risk, they take the similar thinking. They are really the very early backers of disruptive innovation, right? Because just by definition, disruptive and innovation, such models don't exist. Therefore, they are new, they are disruptive, they're going to change the old order in some ways. Some form or format, they will change the old order. So these investors not only invest in best of the best, and to me, the best of the best is really the best entrepreneurs. I completely agree with Sanjeev that it is the entrepreneurs and their ability to execute till the cows come home is very important. So I think these investors are looking for people. There's probably nothing else on the ground. There's no data, there's no real business there. And they are backing just the entrepreneurs and the potential of them to build large companies. So I think that is their first input to be able to how key they are, because they are breeding these young startups, which VC funds, etc., come in. The second piece, I think, which is even more important, writing a check is easy. As much as it's not as easy, but it's much easier than putting in mind space and time and mentoring these startups, right? I'll give you an example. We have a company called Nocard. When the company started, it was a company which was building products as a robotic waterless solar panel cleaners. That's what they were building. And then came the lockdown. Completely stalled. Nothing could happen, right? We actually created a task force of 20 people, 22 people. And every day of the lockdown for 95 days, every day, including Sundays, we all got around the Zoom calls from 12 noon to 2 p.m. And we actually helped the entrepreneurs to conceptualize, design, build a prototype, and get a ventilator landed on ground, which they could then scale and sell. Okay, these are young entrepreneurs. Their total experience was in a single digit, right? But that mentoring helped them to create a business which would have otherwise completely been wiped out. And in 15 months, their revenues were 4 times the valuation at which we invested, right? Now, this is technology at its best, right? It was enabled by technology, number one. It was a technology that got embedded in a device so that there's a lot of remote dashboarding that could happen. But more importantly, it was because of that mentoring. We had people who were CEOs of major medtech companies, global companies. We had drug controllers sitting there. We had FDA guys who we could call in. And we had procurement people sitting there, supply chain managers who could come in and advise the company, etc., etc. We got people from Taiwan and Singapore and Germany to help. I think that piece of mentoring transformed the company. So to me, the angel if I use the word, it's that mind space, that mentoring, that time that you put in along with your check, which is actually much more powerful and valuable than just writing a check. So I think angels not only breed the next generation of innovation, they actually help that innovation to become valuable businesses. Because innovation is an idea. It's a POC in some ways, right? And ideas don't make a business. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It only sees life when it becomes a business, right? And then you have it grow into what we say, good growing startups. And I'm sure all early stage investors, even I would say Karthik would probably agree, Sanjeev would probably agree, that there's a lot more time you're investing than that one check that you put in. And that is very important for any early stage investor. And we are seeing that repeatedly.
Great. Thanks, Padmaja. Smriti, do we have time for a couple of more questions?
I think we can take up audience questions briefly.
Okay. I just had a question for Sharad. Sharad, how do you see the role of blockchain technology in credit delivery? Very quickly.
Yeah, not very significant. See, there are two different motivations for DLT, distributed ledger technology. One is to get frictionless, cheap payment systems. So, so we have UPI. Of course, UPI does more transactions than probably all the blockchain transactions put together, in terms of volume of transactions. So India has a frictionless system that is very inexpensive to use. Scandinavia has a frictionless system that is expensive to use. They pay about 1% or more, as transaction fee in Scandinavia, essentially to a foreign company, Visa and MasterCard. And the rest of the world neither has frictionless nor has cheap. So for them to use distributed ledger technology to create a new money ledger so that they can have frictionless payments is a very attractive proposition. But that's not an attractive proposition for India. In India, what we need is programmable money so that we can actually enforce small commercial contracts. So if I have a loan agreement, it can be enforced cheaply. The simplest commercial contract is an invoice. I promise to send you something and you'll pay me 10 days later. Our judicial system does not enforce that very well. So we need something to enforce that. That can be enforced in code. But that enforcement requires us to use both the goods ledger and the money ledger. So goods ledger and money ledger system is there, and it's actually being built. It is called Badal. And if you are interested or your audience is interested, they can go to the iSpirit blog. I think it is the last but one blog there. So this is being built in India, but the motivation for that is very different than what it is in the West. And it is to enforce small commercial contracts. One of those contracts can be small lending contracts as well.
Great. Thanks, Sharad. And finally, Saurabh, a very quick question to you. We have a multitude of identity documents in the country today, say Aadhaar or PAN card or Ration card, voter ID card. Since we are talking about digitization and in this digital era, can we not have a single ID card?
I don't think Saurabh is there. He had to leave, I think.
Okay, okay.
But I can answer a little bit on his behalf. See, the idea of Aadhaar was a federated. There were two big ideas behind Aadhaar. One idea that it will serve both the private sector and the government sector. And the second is that it's a federated IT system. So, for example, I mean, Skype offers an ID that is Aadhaar verified, and you can then use the Skype ID in many places. And the IT services industry does use it for verified interviews, right? So what had happened is, because of the legal process that was underway leading to the September 2018 judgment, you know, both of these big ideas kind of got pushed to the behind. And now with Dr. Saurabh Garg coming in, a new wind blowing through the system, you can see that this is being revived. And as he had mentioned earlier, there is a revived focus on making sure identity can be used by private sector and the federated ID system can be used as we go forward. So you will see both of these ideas come to life in the coming year as we move forward, largely because of the good work that is being done by UIDAI.
Sure, thank you. Smriti, do we have time for audience questions or we end the session? I think we have overshot the allocated time.
Yeah, I think we'll have to wrap up here.
Okay. So maybe what we could do is the questions we could circulate to the panel members
Definitely.
and then, you know, get their responses and send them back to the audience.
Audience,
right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. We had an excellent interaction with the panel members and it was very engaging, as is evident that from the fact that we have overshot the time allocated to us. There were many more questions that we would have liked to ask, but in the interest of time, I think we will need to conclude here. And I once again thank the panelists for sharing their valuable inputs and experiences. And I'm sure this would be helpful to the startup entrepreneurs, and there will be quite a few takeaways from this seminar today. With this, I conclude the session. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you to all the esteemed panelists for sharing some very pertinent insights and points concerning the MSME and startup sector of India. The deliberations clearly established that it is a breakout time for MSMEs and startups to go to the next orbit of growth. The various policy actions which could assist MSMEs in the journey were discussed today. The latest digitech trends were also discussed. We are sure that the insights provided will not only guide all the startups and MSMEs in their respective pursuit, but will also help towards valuable policy action by various institutions present today. With that, we have to come to the end of the MSMEs Startups at 75 Summit, organized by SIDBI in association with Economic Times. Thank you once again to all the panelists for your time and the knowledge you shared here with us. Thank you to our audience for being so patient and interactive. Finally, thank you to SIDBI for showing confidence in Economic Times as a partner for the summit. Take care and stay safe.